Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Joshua Mercer had been a wilderness ranger for Superior National Forest for 11 years, and in that time, he'd developed certain habits that kept him alive. Check the Garmin eTrex Vista twice before leaving the station. Pack 2 days extra rations. Trust the data, not the gut feeling. It was this methodical approach that had earned him a reputation as the ranger to call when things went sideways in the Boundary Waters, which, despite what the tourism brochures claimed, happened more often than anyone wanted to admit. The morning Elizabeth Hartley disappeared, Joshua was reviewing thermal imaging reports from a Canadian wildfire 70 miles north. The smoke had been drifting south for 3 days, creating a haze that turned the October sun into a dull copper disk. His office at the Kawishiwi Ranger Station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, familiar and grounding. "Josh?" He looked up to find his supervisor, District Ranger Patricia Kowalski, standing in the doorway. Her face had that tight, controlled expression he'd learned meant bad news delivered calmly. "We've got a missing person. Solo hiker, 34-year-old female. Name's Elizabeth Hartley. Her brother filed the report 2 hours ago. She was due back yesterday afternoon." Joshua pulled up the incident form on his computer. Where was she hiking? She registered for the Kekakabik Trail. Entry point was at the Fernberg Road trailhead. Said she'd be doing a 4-day loop, coming back through Ogishkamunsi Lake. Joshua felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, but calculation. The Kek was 40 miles of brutal terrain, and this time of year, temperatures dropped below freezing at night. Solo? Solo. Her brother says she's experienced, has been coming up here every October for the past 6 years. Same route every time. Did she file an itinerary? Patricia handed him a printed form. Joshua scanned it with practiced efficiency. Elizabeth's handwriting was neat, almost compulsive in its precision. She'd noted her planned campsites with GPS coordinates, her expected check-in times, even her backup water purification methods. It was the itinerary of someone who understood the wilderness, who respected it. That made her disappearance worse. "I'll head out in 20 minutes, Joshua said. "We should notify County SAR, get already done. They're mobilizing but won't arrive until this evening. Weather windows closing tomorrow. Front coming through." Patricia paused. Her brother mentioned something else. Said she'd been calling him the past 2 nights. Sounded off. Off how? Scared. Said she felt like something was following her. Kept hearing sounds at night. Patricia's expression didn't change, but Joshua caught the slight tension in her jaw. They both knew what that usually meant. Bear, possibly aggressive, or someone's imagination running wild in the dark. Her last call was at 6:47 p.m. yesterday. Phone went dead mid-sentence. Joshua made notes on his clipboard, forcing himself to process this as data points, not as the beginning of something that made his skin feel too tight. Battery? Brother doesn't think so. Said she always packed solar chargers, was meticulous about that stuff. The word meticulous stuck with Joshua as he prepped his pack. He triple-checked his gear. Motorola XTS 5000 radio, backup batteries, first aid kit rated for major trauma, Petzl headlamp, emergency bivvy, MSR water filter, bear spray, his grandfather's compass as backup to the GPS. The Winchester Model 70 went in last, Superior National Forest policy for rangers heading into remote areas alone. The drive to Fernberg Road took 40 minutes. The smoke haze had thickened, turning the forest into something flat and strange, like a photograph that had been overexposed. Joshua parked at the trailhead and studied Elizabeth's vehicle, a 2006 Subaru Outback. Locked. Nothing unusual visible through the windows. He noted the license plate, checked the tires, good tread, properly inflated. A woman who maintained her vehicle. The trail register confirmed her entry 4 days ago. Her signature matched the itinerary form. Below it, 3 other entries from the past week, all groups all already checked out. Joshua signed in, Noted his departure time, 11:23 a.m., October 17, 2009. The Kakakabik Trail began innocuously enough, a well-maintained path through stands of birch and aspen, already skeletal with autumn. But Joshua knew this was deceptive. 5 miles in, the trail became primitive, barely marked, the kind of terrain that swallowed people who made even small mistakes. He made good time for the first hour, covering 3 miles, his breathing steady and controlled. The forest was quiet. Too quiet, he thought, then dismissed it. The smoke was suppressing bird activity. Logical. Explainable. At the 2-hour mark, he reached Elizabeth's first planned campsite, a clearing overlooking the eastern shore of Kakakabik Lake. The fire ring showed recent use. Joshua knelt, examining the cold ash. He took a twig and stirred through it, noting partially burned wrappers from Cliff Bars, the foil from a Mountain House freeze-dried meal. Elizabeth had been here. He checked his notes. This matched her timeline from 3 nights ago. Then he saw the tree, a white birch at the clearing's edge and carved into its bark. A single word, rough and hasty, the letters scored deep enough to weep sap. Hungry Joshua photographed it with his department-issue Nikon D40, then studied the carving more closely. The letters were irregular, done with something sharp but not a knife, maybe a tent stake or rock edge. The sap was still tacky, recent, possibly yesterday. He tried his radio. Kawashiwi Station, this is Ranger Mercer, radio check, over. Static. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. Nothing. The terrain here created dead zones, but his topographic map showed he should have line of sight to the relay tower on Ensign Ridge. He checked his Garmin, signal strength was good, showing his position accurately at 47 degree ver Fe 923 N, 91 deg 14 18 W. Joshua moved on, following Elizabeth's planned route toward Strupp Lake. The trail narrowed, became rockier. He found her second campsite by mid-afternoon, and this time the signs were more disturbing. The tent was still there. It stood at the base of a granite outcropping, a big Agnes copper spur, professionally set up with proper guy lines and stakes. The rainfly was taut, the vestibule zipped closed. Everything about it suggested someone who intended to return. Joshua approached slowly, his hand drifting to the bear spray on his belt. Elizabeth? National Park Service? Elizabeth Hartley? No response. The forest pressed in with that same unnatural quiet. He unzipped the tent fly. The interior was neat, sleeping bag folded, backpack propped in the corner, cooking gear organized in stuff sacks. Joshua inventoried the contents methodically. MSR Whisperlight stove, platypus water bladder still half full, first aid kit, unopened, bear canister with 3 days of food remaining. Her cell phone was in the mesh pocket of the tent. He pressed the power button. Dead. He pocketed it. Evidence, and possibly recoverable data if they could charge it. But it was the journal that stopped him. A moleskin notebook, water-resistant, filled with Elizabeth's precise handwriting. The early entries were mundane. Observations about trail conditions, wildlife sightings, thoughts about work stress she'd come here to escape. Joshua flipped to the final entries. October 15th. Day 2. Something's wrong with this place. I know how that sounds. I know what I'm supposed to think, that it's just my anxiety, just the stress I came here to clear from my head. But I've hiked the Kek 5 times before. I know these sounds. I know this forest. What I heard last night wasn't a bear, wasn't a wolf. It was deliberate, circling, and the cold. It shouldn't be this cold. My thermometer read 19 degrees when I checked at 2 a.m. The forecast said low 30s. October 16th, Day 3. I'm not imagining this. Something followed me today, stayed just out of sight, matching my pace exactly. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it moved. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned, nothing. Found something at my lunch break. Bones, piled in a circle, stripped completely clean, not scattered like a predator kill, arranged. and in the center, a word scraped into the dirt. Hungry. I tried calling David, but service is spotty. I told him I'm scared. I am. This is different. This is wrong. I should turn back. I know I should turn back. But it's the same distance either way now, and at least if I keep going, I'm moving toward the exit. I can do 2 more days. I can. October 16th, night. I saw it. I didn't want to write this down because writing it makes it real, but I have to document this. I have to. If something happens. Just after sunset, I saw something across the lake. Tall, wrong proportions, moving through the trees on the far shore. At first I thought it was a person, another hiker. But the way it moved, it didn't walk. It lurched, limbs too long. And when it stopped and looked toward me, I felt something I've never felt before. Not fear, recognition. Like it knew me. Like it had been looking for me specifically. The smell hit a second later. Rot. Sweet and thick, even across the water. I need to move. First light. I'm hiking out the fastest route. Fuck the itinerary. Fuck the loop. I'm getting out of... The entry stopped mid-sentence. The pen had gouged across the page, a long scratch that trailed off the paper's edge. Joshua's hands were steady as he photographed each page, but something in his chest had gone tight and cold. He was a rational man. He dealt in evidence, in facts. People got disoriented in the wilderness. They experienced pareidolia, seeing patterns and threats where none existed. Stress, exhaustion, low blood sugar, all could explain Elizabeth's deteriorating mental state. But the tent was here. Her supplies were here. She was not. He checked the perimeter of the campsite looking for tracks, signs of struggle, blood. The ground was a mix of exposed granite and thin soil covered in pine needles. Not ideal for tracking. But he found something. Depressions in the moss, leading away from the tent toward the north. Boot prints. Elizabeth's size, based on the sole pattern. He photographed them, then followed. They led 50 yards into the forest before disappearing at a rocky ledge. Joshua swept the area in expanding circles, looking for where the trail picked up again. Nothing. It was as if she'd simply stopped existing at that spot. The light was failing. Joshua checked his watch, 5:47 p.m. In his methodical way, he calculated his options. He could return to the trailhead, organize a proper search team for morning. That was protocol. That was safe. But Elizabeth's journal entries pressed against his thoughts. Something followed me. It was deliberate. Joshua made his decision. He would push on to her intended third campsite, one more location to check, then reassess. He had 4 hours of headlamp battery, plenty of food. He knew these woods. The trail to Agamock Lake was treacherous in the fading light, a narrow path that skirted the edge of several boggy areas where one wrong step would mean a soaking in near-freezing water. Joshua moved carefully, checking his GPS every 15 minutes. The smoke haze had intensified, turning twilight into something premature and oppressive. He noticed the cold next. His breath came out in thick plumes, and when he checked his thermometer, it read 18 degrees. That couldn't be right. The forecast had called for lows in the mid-30s. He tapped the device, checked the battery, functioning normally. A sound stopped him. Distant but clear in the dead air, a crack like a large branch breaking. He stood motionless, controlling his breathing, listening. The sound came again, closer now. Rhythmic. Footsteps. Elizabeth? His voice seemed too loud, too vulnerable. Elizabeth Hartley, this is the National Park Service. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt deliberate, intelligent. Joshua's hand moved to the bear spray, thumb on the trigger. Then from his left, another crack. And behind him, another. Not one source. Multiple. Surrounding him. His rational mind cataloged possibilities. Elk, though they rarely moved in coordinated patterns. A pack of wolves, though wolves avoided humans. His own footsteps echoing off rock faces, though that made no acoustic sense in this terrain. Joshua forced himself to move forward, maintaining his pace, not running. Running was how people died in the wilderness. Panic was how people made fatal mistakes. The fourth campsite appeared in his headlamp beam like something from a fever dream, not empty like he'd expected, but wrong. The fire ring had been disturbed, the rocks scattered outward in a perfect circle. In the center, something dark stained the ground. Joshua knelt, touched it with a gloved finger. Sticky. He brought his headlamp close. Blood. A lot of it. And drag marks leading away into the forest. Fuck. The word came out quiet, factual. Joshua pulled his radio. Any station. This is Ranger Joshua Mercer. Badge number 2847. I have evidence of a violent incident at Agamock Lake. Coordinates 48-211N, 91-1733W. Requesting immediate SAR and possible law enforcement. Over. Static. He tried 3 more times on different frequencies. Nothing but the hiss of empty channels. Joshua followed the drag marks. They led 30 feet into the trees before stopping at another birch. Carved into its bark, larger than before, the letters gouged deep. So hungry, and below it, a symbol he didn't recognize. A circle with lines radiating outward, like a sun or a mouth opened impossibly wide. He photographed it. His hands remained steady, but something fundamental in his chest had shifted. This wasn't random. This wasn't a bear attack or a human predator covering their tracks. This was something presenting itself, marking territory, leaving messages. For the first time in his 11-year career, Joshua Mercer felt something he couldn't rationalize away. The certainty that he was being watched by something that wanted him to know it. Joshua made camp in a defensible position, a granite overhang that provided cover from 3 sides and clear sight lines to the surrounding forest. He built no fire, not wanting to compromise his night vision or signal his position. Instead, he ate an MRE cold, checking his perimeter every 10 minutes with the headlamp set to red beam to preserve his eyes' dark adaptation. The temperature continued to drop. By 8 p.m., his thermometer read 11 degrees, and he could see his breath crystallizing in the still air. This was meteorologically impossible. Joshua checked the device again, even swapped in backup batteries. The reading didn't change. He tried the radio hourly. Static. His Garmin still showed strong satellite signal, confirmed his position with precision, but the communication systems were dead. Joshua made notes in his incident log, documenting everything with the same methodical precision that had defined his career. If something happened to him, whoever found his body would have a clear record. That thought should have terrified him. Instead, it focused him. At 11:34 p.m., he heard the voice. Joshua, his name, spoken clearly in the darkness beyond his camp. A woman's voice. Elizabeth's voice, if he had to guess based on the recordings her brother had played during the briefing. Elizabeth, call out your location. Joshua, so cold, help me. The voice came from the northwest, maybe 40 yards into the trees. Joshua swept his headlamp across the forest. Nothing. Just the stark white trunks of birch trees creating a maze of vertical lines. I'm a National Park Service ranger. I need you to stay where you are. I'm coming to you. Please, it's following me. It's so hungry. Every instinct told Joshua not to leave his defensive position, but his training overrode instinct. You didn't abandon a victim calling for help. He grabbed his pack, kept the rifle in hand, and moved toward the voice. Keep talking so I can locate you. Hurts. So cold. Can't feel my hands. Joshua moved methodically, checking his footing with each step. The forest had transformed at night into something primordial, the smoke-hazed moonlight creating pockets of absolute shadow between the trees. His headlamp beam seemed inadequate, swallowed by the darkness. Elizabeth, I'm approximately 20 yards from your position. Do you have a light source? Can you signal me? Here, I'm here. The voice was close now, maybe 10 yards ahead, behind a thick stand of pines. Joshua approached, rifle ready but pointed down, safe but accessible. I'm coming around the trees. Don't be alarmed by the weapon. It's for wildlife protection. He stepped into the clearing beyond the pines. Empty. The voice came again, but now from behind him, back toward his camp. "Joshua, help me." His skin prickled, a physiological response he couldn't suppress. This wasn't Elizabeth. Couldn't be Elizabeth. No human could move that silently, that quickly, through this terrain in the dark. "Who are you?" He kept his voice level, authoritative. "So hungry, Joshua. So cold and hungry." The voice changed as it spoke, deepening, developing harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat. Like multiple voices speaking in unison, slightly out of phase. Joshua's headlamp caught movement, a shape between distant trees, tall and wrong, disappearing behind a granite boulder before he could focus on it. He swung the beam back, illuminating only empty forest. His rational mind scrambled for explanations. Auditory hallucination from stress and cold. Reflection from his headlamp creating the illusion of movement. Bear making vocalizations that his stressed brain was pattern matching into human speech. None of it fit the data. Joshua retreated to his camp, moving backward, keeping his light sweeping the tree line. Something was out there. Something that knew his name. That mimicked Elizabeth's voice. That understood enough about human behavior to lure him away from safety. Back under the granite overhang, he wedged himself into the deepest part of the shelter, rifle across his lap. He turned off his headlamp to conserve battery and to listen without visual distraction. The sounds started 20 minutes later. Footsteps, circling his position. Heavy enough to break branches underfoot, but the pattern was wrong. Too many legs, or legs moving in ways that violated human anatomy. And between the footsteps, sounds that made his throat tighten. Wet clicking like a tongue against teeth and a low humming that vibrated in his chest. Then the smell hit. Elizabeth had described it in her journal. Rot. Sweet and thick. But experiencing it was different than reading about it. The smell triggered something primal in Joshua's brain. Some ancient prey species recognition that this was the scent of death, of consumption, of being eaten. His hands shook. He gripped the rifle tighter, using the physical sensation to anchor himself. He was a ranger. He'd dealt with aggressive bears, with lost hikers in hypothermic shock, with armed poachers. He had training. He had protocol. Protocol didn't cover this. "I know you're out there." He kept his voice firm. "I'm a federal law enforcement officer. I'm armed and authorized to use lethal force if threatened." The circling stopped. In the sudden silence, he heard his own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. Then, from directly in front of his shelter, close enough that he should be able to touch it. Not threat. Hungry. The voice was Elizabeth's again, but degraded, like a recording played through damaged speakers. Joshua clicked on his headlamp. Nothing was there. But in the dirt at the shelter's opening, fresh marks. 3 long gouges parallel, deep enough to expose the mineral layer beneath the soil. And in the center, written with a finger, or something approximating a finger, "Feed me." Joshua's analytical mind tried to process this as evidence. Depth of the marks suggested significant force. Spacing suggested digits longer than human fingers. The writing implement had left residue, something dark and viscous that his brain identified as blood, before he could stop the thought. He took a photograph even as his hands trembled. Documentation, evidence, the rituals of his profession keeping him tethered to sanity. The circling resumed, but closer now. Joshua could hear breathing, wet, labored, punctuated by sounds like bones grinding against cartilage. His headlamp beam penetrated maybe 15 feet into the darkness before the smoke and shadows consumed it. Anything could be just beyond that radius. "What do you want?" The question escaped before he could stop it, a violation of his own rules about maintaining professional detachment. The answer came from multiple directions simultaneously, Elizabeth's voice overlapping with something deeper, older. "Want? Want? Waited so long. So hungry. Smelled you. Smelled her. Warm. Full. Hungry." A shape moved at the edge of his light. Joshua caught only an impression. Height. Too much height. Limbs bent at angles that made his eyes hurt to track. He raised the rifle, finger on the trigger. "Show yourself. Identify yourself, or I will fire." Laughter. Not human laughter. The sound a coyote might make if it understood humor and found something darkly funny. Then silence. Joshua counted his heartbeats, forced his breathing to slow. He had 12 rounds in the Winchester, 4 protein bars, 3 liters of water. His radio was useless. His GPS worked but meant nothing without extraction. The nearest ranger station was 40 miles through terrain that apparently contained something that mimicked voices and left messages written in blood. He could survive this. He had to survive this. Survival meant maintaining rational thought, following protocol, not letting fear override judgment. But as the night deepened and the circling continued, as the temperature dropped to 4 degrees according to his thermometer, as shapes moved just beyond his vision and voices whispered his name in tones that made his teeth ache, Joshua began to understand something Elizabeth had written in her journal. This is different. This is wrong. The worst part wasn't the fear. The worst part was the way his analytical mind kept trying to categorize what was happening, to fit it into known frameworks, and failing. Failing completely, because the data suggested something that couldn't exist, something that violated every principle of natural law he'd spent his life studying. And yet it was here, circling, hungry. At 3:47 a.m., Joshua's headlamp beam caught something that made him forget to breathe. Antlers, massive, spreading at least 6 feet across, but wrong, growing from a skull that was too elongated, too hollow-eyed. The face beneath was stretched skin over prominent bone, jaw distended impossibly wide. The body, partially visible behind a birch trunk, was emaciated to the point of desiccation. Ribs protruding, but the limbs were grotesquely long, ending in hands that had too many fingers. It stood motionless at the edge of his light, and when it tilted its head to regard him, Joshua saw its eyes, black, depthless, and fully aware. "There you are," it said in Elizabeth's voice, and smiled with teeth that had never been human. Joshua fired. The gunshot was deafening in the still air, the muzzle flash blinding. The bullet hit center mass. He was certain of that, his training overriding his terror. But the thing didn't fall. It jerked, twisted, and the sound it made froze Joshua's blood. Not pain but irritation, like he'd committed a social faux pas. Then it was gone, vanished into the darkness with speed that shouldn't be possible for something that size. Joshua's ears rang from the gunshot. He chambered another round, swept his light across the forest. Nothing, but he could smell it now, that rot-sweet stench, and hear it breathing from multiple locations, as if it could be in several places at once. "You shouldn't have done that, Joshua." Elizabeth's voice, sad and disappointed. "Now I'm hungrier. Now I'm angry." The scratching started on the granite above his shelter, slow, deliberate, the sound of something with claws dragging across stone, calculating, measuring. Joshua understood with horrible clarity. It was testing the overhang's strength, determining if it could reach him from above. He had 11 rounds left, no backup coming, no way to call for help, and something impossible, something that knew his name and wore Elizabeth's voice like a costume, was figuring out how to get to him. His analytical mind supplied a word, dredged from half-remembered conversations with old-timers, with Ojibwe consultants who'd worked on forest management projects. Wendigo, the thing they didn't talk about, the hunger that walks, the punishment for greed, for gluttony, for violating the sacred relationship with the forest. Joshua had dismissed those stories as folklore, as cultural metaphors not meant to be taken literally. The scratching intensified, and chunks of granite began to rain down into his shelter. He'd been wrong. Dawn came slowly, the smoke-choked sky shifting from black to gray without ever achieving true daylight. Joshua had fired 4 more rounds during the night, at sounds, at movements, at shapes that dissolved when his light touched them. He didn't know if he'd hit anything. Didn't know if bullets could hit what hunted him. The scratching had stopped an hour before sunrise. The circling had ceased. The voices had fallen silent. But Joshua knew it wasn't gone. He could feel it watching, waiting. patient in a way that suggested it had all the time in the world. His hands shook as he packed his gear. Fatigue weighted his limbs, but adrenaline kept him moving. He had to move. Staying here meant dying here. The question was, which direction? Back the way he'd come meant 40 miles to the trailhead. Forward, following Elizabeth's planned route, might bring him to Ogishkamansi Lake and the northern exit in 25 miles. But Elizabeth had been following that route when she disappeared. Joshua checked his GPS, forced his tired brain to calculate. The northern exit. Faster extraction if he could maintain pace. If the thing let him, he emerged from the shelter as the weak sun finally broke through the haze. The forest looked normal in daylight, just trees and rock and the carpet of fallen leaves. No evidence of the night's terror except for the gouges in the dirt and the bullet casings scattered around his position. And one other thing. 50 feet into the forest, hanging from a low branch. Elizabeth's backpack. The same pack he'd seen in her tent yesterday, but now it was here, impossible distance from where it should be, swaying gently in the windless air. Joshua approached slowly, rifle ready. The pack was intact, undamaged. He opened it with shaking hands. Empty. Everything gone. Her supplies, her equipment, her spare clothes. Everything except one item, placed deliberately at the bottom. Her journal. Open to a new entry, written in Elizabeth's precise handwriting. October 17th. Morning, Joshua. If you're reading this, I'm so sorry. I led you here, I didn't mean to. But it wanted me to. It wanted someone who would follow, someone who would try to understand. The ranger who went missing in 1987, Thomas Brennan. He's here. He's been here this whole time. Part of it now. And the hikers from 2003. And that survey team from the 70s. All of us. Feeding it. Becoming it. It's so hungry, Joshua. It's always hungry. And when you're consumed by hunger, eventually you become the hunger. That's what the stories mean. That's what the Wendigo is. The end result of greed, of taking more than you need, of consuming without gratitude. You have a choice. You can run. Maybe you'll make it. Maybe you won't. The faster you move, the more excited it gets. You become prey. You become interesting. Or you can do what I should have done, what we all should have done. Stop running. Stop fighting. Except that some things in this forest are older than maps, older than national parks, older than the idea that humans have dominion here. Leave an offering. Real food. Something that costs you. And speak the old words. I don't know if you know them. I didn't, but maybe. The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen trailing off. Joshua stared at the pages, his rational mind trying to parse what this meant. Had Elizabeth written this? Or had something else? Something that could mimic handwriting as easily as it mimicked voices. And if it was real, if any of this insane suggestion was legitimate, what did it mean? Stop running? Accept? Speak old words he didn't know? A sound behind him made Joshua spin, rifle raised. Nothing there. Just forest. But carved into a massive oak, fresh enough that sap still wept from the wounds. Choose his grandfather's voice echoed in memory, unexpected and vivid. Old Robert Mercer, who'd worked these forests in the 60s, who'd learned from Ojibwe elders and retired with strange stories he'd only share when drunk. Some places don't belong to us, Josh. Never did. We just borrowed them, and some of us forgot to be grateful. Forgot there's always a price for taking without asking. Joshua had been 12 years old, had dismissed it as the rambling of an old man who'd spent too much time alone in the woods. Now, standing in the boundary waters with 7 rounds left and something impossible watching from the shadows, those words carried different weight. He could run, push hard for the northern exit. He was fit, experienced, knew these trails. He might make it, or he might end up like Elizabeth, like Ranger Brennan, like all the others whose names were carved on a list somewhere, marked Missing Boundary Waters. Joshua looked at his pack, at his carefully rationed supplies, at the food that might keep him alive for the 3 days it would take to hike out. If he gave it up, if he left it here as some kind of offering to something that shouldn't exist, He'd be gambling his survival on folklore, on stories, on the opposite of everything his rational mind believed. The smell hit again, closer now, the sweet rot of something ancient and patient, and beneath it, another scent, Elizabeth's perfume, faint but unmistakable. He'd noticed it on her tent, a detail his trained observation had catalogued. Lavender and sage. Elizabeth? His voice was hoarse from the long night. I'm here, Joshua. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I'm always here now. We all are. Feeding it. Feeding the hunger. This isn't possible. You keep saying that, but you've seen it. You've seen me. A shape resolved from behind a thick pine, and Joshua's breath caught. It was Elizabeth, or something wearing her form. She looked wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Proportions slightly off, movements too fluid, eyes focused on something beyond him rather than at him. What do you want? He asked, and hated how broken he sounded. Want? I don't want anything anymore, that's the point. It's the Wendigo that wants, that's all it is, pure want, pure hunger. Never satisfied because satisfaction would mean ending, and it can't end. Won't end. Not until every selfish, greedy, taking thing that walks these woods understands what it means to be consumed. It, smiled. You're not greedy, Joshua. You're not what it really wants. You're just here. Just another warm body that took without asking permission. I'm a federal ranger. I'm authorized. Authorized? Her laugh was Elizabeth's, but with harmonics that made his bones ache. You think papers from Washington mean anything to something that was here before there was a Washington? That watched the glaciers retreat? That knew these forests when your ancestors were still figuring out agriculture? Joshua's grip tightened on the rifle. Then what do you want from me? Grandfather told you. Your grandfather, Robert Mercer, born 1929, died 2007. Worked the Superior Forest for 38 years, knew the old ways, tried to teach you. It tilted its head, bird-like. Leave an offering, speak gratitude. Acknowledge that you're a guest here, not an owner. Mean it, Joshua. The Wendigo can smell insincerity, can taste it. And if I do that, it lets me leave? The thing wearing Elizabeth's face moved closer, and Joshua saw the cracks in the illusion. Skin too pale, joints bending slightly wrong, teeth too white and too sharp. If you mean it. Maybe, if you're just trying to bargain your way out while planning to come back with guns and helicopters and all your human arrogance about dominion, then no. Then you'll feed it just like I did. Joshua's mind raced through scenarios. He could fire now, empty his rifle into the apparition, then run. He might make it 3 miles before exhaustion and cold took him. He could try to negotiate, play for time until SR arrived, but SAR wasn't coming. No one knew where he was. His radio was dead. Or he could do the impossible thing. The thing that violated every principle of his rational, evidence-based worldview. He could believe. How? The word came out barely above a whisper. What do I say? The Elizabeth thing smiled, and for just a moment Joshua saw genuine warmth there, perhaps a fragment of the real woman trapped in suffering in whatever had consumed her. The words don't matter. The meaning does. But if you want a formula... She leaned close, breath smelling like deep soil and old snow. Grandfather Mercer left you something. Check your compass. The real one. The one he carried in 1963 when he got lost for 3 days and somehow found his way back. Joshua's hand moved to his pack, to the brass compass that had been his grandfather's gift. He'd carried it for 11 years. More talisman than tool. He opened it now, and on the inside of the case, etched in his grandfather's careful script, were words he'd never noticed. Miigwech, Gichi Manadu. Miigwech, Aki. I take only what I need. I leave only gratitude. I am a guest here. Ojibwe words. Thank you, Great Spirit, thank you, Earth. He knew, Joshua said. He encountered it. Year you were born. Saved himself by remembering he was human, not a consumer. Remembered gratitude, The thing stepped back, becoming less Elizabeth and more something else, tall, wrong, hungry. Your choice now. Feed it with your flesh or feed it with your humility. Either one sates it, but only one lets you leave. Then it was gone, vanished into shadows that shouldn't exist in morning light. Joshua stood alone in the forest, holding a compass and a rifle, feeling the weight of the impossible pressing down on him. His analytical mind cataloged the absurdity. He was a federal employee with a master's degree in wildlife management, standing in a mapped, studied, scientifically documented wilderness area, contemplating whether to perform a ritual to appease something from indigenous folklore. But his grandfather's voice whispered, "Some places don't belong to us." And Elizabeth's journal, with its progressively desperate entries documenting something that shouldn't exist but did, and his own eyes which had seen what circled him last night. Joshua made his choice. He unpacked his food stores, all of them, 4 protein bars, 3 freeze-dried meals, a pound of trail mix, his emergency rations. He laid them at the base of the oak tree with the carved word. Then he added his coffee, his spare socks, his emergency fire starter, things that cost him, things that would make his journey out dangerous. He opened the compass, read the words his grandfather had left. Then he spoke them, first in halting Ojibwe, then in English, and meant them. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me walk here. I took without asking. I thought these lands were mine because a government said so. I was wrong." His voice shook, but he continued. "I'm grateful for every step I've taken here. I'm grateful for the chance to leave. I'm a guest. I'm just a guest." Silence. The forest held its breath. Then, from deep in the trees, a sound. Not threatening, not mocking, almost like an exhalation, like something that had been holding tension for a long time, finally relaxing. The temperature rose, not dramatically, but noticeably. Joshua's thermometer read 34 degrees, close to the forecasted normal. And carved into the oak, below choose, a new word appeared as he watched, forming as if invisible fingers traced the bark. Walk. Joshua walked. He took only what he needed, his rifle, his water, his navigation tools, left everything else as offering. He followed his GPS coordinates toward the northern exit and nothing followed him. But he felt watched, not threateningly, observationally, like something was making sure he honored his words. 3 days later, Joshua emerged at the Ogishkamunsi Lake trailhead, dehydrated, hypothermic, 20 pounds lighter. He'd survived on water and the few berries he'd found, moving slowly, speaking gratitude each morning and evening. They say our team found him unconscious next to his truck, where he'd collapsed after using his keys to scratch into the paint. Found alive. The debriefing was extensive. Joshua told them most of it: Elizabeth's abandoned tent, her journal entries, the evidence of blood at the campsite. He submitted his photographs, his GPS data, his incident reports. He didn't mention the Wendigo, didn't describe what had circled his camp, didn't explain the ritual that had saved him. The official report listed Elizabeth Hartley as missing, presumed dead, wildlife attack. They sent teams to search for her body, found nothing except her tent and supplies, and those strange carvings in the trees. The carvings were documented, photographed, then dismissed as possibly created by the victim while experiencing mental distress. Ranger Thomas Brennan's cold case was noted as potentially relevant, but no connections were established. Joshua Mercer returned to duty after medical leave. He still worked the boundary waters, still led SAR operations when hikers went missing, but he'd changed his protocol. Before every trip into the deep forest, he left offerings at the trailhead, usually food, sometimes equipment, always something that cost him. And he spoke the words his grandfather had taught him, even if only in his mind. Miigwech. I am a guest here. Most rangers thought it was PTSD, a harmless ritual from his traumatic experience. They didn't ask questions when he insisted all SR teams leave similar offerings. Respect the forest, he'd say. It was here first. Some of them thought he'd gone strange. Others nodded, understanding in a way that suggested they'd had their own encounters. their own moments of realizing that maps and badges didn't actually confer ownership. Joshua kept Elizabeth's journal locked in his desk, evidence in a case that would never close. Sometimes he read it, especially the final entry. The one that might have been her, might have been something else, might have been the forest itself trying to teach him what his grandfather had learned decades earlier. That some hungers can never be satisfied. That some places demand respect, not ownership. That the word wilderness implies something beyond human control, and perhaps that's exactly how it should remain. On quiet nights, when the wind moved through the pines in that particular way, Joshua could hear his name whispered in Elizabeth's voice. Not threatening, just reminding, making sure he remembered his promise. He always did. Because Joshua Mercer had learned what every creature should learn. In the deep woods, you're never really alone, and whether you survive depends not on your equipment or your training, but on remembering that you're a guest. And guests should always be grateful. Always. Olympic National Park, Washington, October 2014. Tyler Kendrick had been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 6 years, and in that time he'd developed a reputation for solving problems other rangers couldn't. Not through intuition or gut feelings, Tyler didn't trust those, but through methodical observation and logical deduction. When hikers reported strange noises on the Hoh River Trail, Tyler identified the source as wind patterns through a specific rock formation. When seasonal staff swore they'd seen lights moving through the Quinault rainforest, Tyler traced them to refracted moonlight off quartz deposits. Everything had an explanation if you looked hard enough, which was why, on October 19, 2014, Tyler found himself hiking alone up the Enchanted Valley Trail at 4:47 p.m., GPS coordinates logged, Motorola radio clipped to his belt, documenting what would either be another mundane explanation or his first genuine mystery. The report had come through dispatch 3 hours earlier. Melissa Hartwell, 26, experienced backpacker from Seattle, had missed her check-in at the Graves Creek Ranger Station. Her itinerary showed a 4-day solo trek through the Enchanted Valley, with planned stops at designated backcountry campsites. She'd checked in on schedule for the first 2 days. Then silence. Tyler had reviewed her permit application that morning. Melissa worked as a medical translator, Japanese to English, at Swedish Medical Center. Her emergency contact listed her grandmother in Tacoma. The application showed meticulous planning, backup water filtration, in-reach satellite communicator, bear canister, first aid certification. Not the profile of someone who'd simply wander off trail or ignore safety protocols. The anomaly that had pulled Tyler from his desk wasn't Melissa's disappearance itself. People got injured, equipment failed, circumstances changed. The anomaly was the other report. At 2:15 p.m., a day hiker named Doug Patterson had descended from the valley in what the ranger at Graves Creek described as a state of extreme agitation. Patterson claimed he'd seen a woman on the trail around mile 7, near the crossing of Pony Creek. He'd called out to her. She'd turned to look at him. According to Patterson, the woman's face was wrong. Not injured, not deformed. Just wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. He'd blinked, and she was gone. Not walked away, not ducked behind trees. Gone, as if she'd never been there at all. Patterson had provided a description that matched Melissa Hartwell's permit photo. Asian woman, late 20s, black hair in a braid, gray Patagonia jacket, blue Osprey pack. Tyler didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in confirmation bias, pattern recognition errors, and the human brain's tendency to fill gaps with fiction. Patterson had probably seen Melissa in distress. His mind had processed her expression as wrong due to fear or confusion, and the apparent disappearance was simply her moving out of sight while Patterson was disoriented. But Tyler believed in thorough investigation, so he'd logged his route plan, packed his SAR kit, and started up the trail with 3 hours of daylight remaining. The Enchanted Valley Trail was aptly named, 13 miles of temperate rainforest leading to a glacial valley ringed by waterfalls. In October, with the tourists gone and the first storms rolling in from the Pacific, it became something else. A tunnel of green silence, broken only by the rush of the Quinault River and the occasional crack of a widowmaker branch overhead. Tyler hiked efficiently, covering the first 6 miles in 2 hours. He'd radioed Graves Creek at mile 4 with a status update. Standard protocol. The weather was holding. Overcast but dry. Temperature around 48 degrees. Wind minimal. His Garmin showed his position overlaid on the trail map, a small triangle moving through digital contour lines. At mile 7, near the Pony Creek crossing, Tyler stopped. The trail here paralleled the river, with thick stands of Sitka spruce and western hemlock creating a canopy that blocked most of the sky. The creek itself was a tributary, only about 8 feet across, crossed by a simple log bridge. Tyler had been across this bridge dozens of times. He stood 20 feet from the crossing and his analytical mind registered something it couldn't immediately categorize. The silence was absolute. Olympic's rainforest was never truly silent. There was always the river, always the wind in the canopy, always the small sounds of a living ecosystem. But in this moment, Tyler heard nothing. Not even his own breathing seemed to produce sound. He looked down at his boots on the packed earth trail. He shifted his weight. No sound. He clapped his hands together. Once. Hard. Nothing. Tyler's pulse quickened slightly, a physiological response he noted with clinical detachment. He pulled out his radio and keyed the transmit button. Graves Creek, this is Kendrick. Radio check, over. He watched his finger on the PTT button. He felt the click under his thumb. But he heard no static, no hiss, nothing from the speaker. Tyler released the button and examined the radio. Power indicator green, battery full. No error messages on the small LCD screen. He tried again. Same result. The radio appeared to be functioning. It just wasn't producing any sound. No, that wasn't logical. Sound was mechanical vibration through air. Radios produced electromagnetic waves that speakers converted to sound waves. If the radio was functional, it had to produce sound, unless there was something wrong with the air itself, Tyler thought, then immediately rejected the idea as absurd. He turned his attention to the environment, forcing himself into observational mode. Document, analyze, explain. The trees weren't moving. Despite the breeze he'd felt half a mile back, the river was still flowing. He could see the water moving over rocks, but it made no sound. A raven flew overhead, wings flapping in complete silence. Tyler pulled his phone from his chest pocket. No signal, which was normal at this elevation and density of forest. He opened his voice recorder app and held the phone to his mouth. October 19th, 16:53 hours. Experiencing acoustic anomaly at Pony Creek Crossing. Testing recording function. He played back the recording. Dead silence. For the first time in his career, Tyler felt something close to fear. Not of danger, but of the unknown. Of a phenomenon his analytical framework couldn't immediately parse. He made himself walk forward toward the log bridge. Each footstep landed in absolute quiet. His pack shifted on his shoulders. He felt the movement, the weight redistribution, but heard nothing. The temperature had dropped. Tyler could see his breath now, which shouldn't be possible at 48 degrees. The vapor hung in the air longer than it should, dispersing slowly as if the atmosphere had thickened. That's when he saw her. She stood on the opposite side of the creek, approximately 30 feet away, partially obscured by the trunk of a massive Sitka spruce. A woman in a gray jacket, black hair, facing away from him. "Melissa?" Tyler called out. "Melissa Hartwell?" No sound came from his mouth. He felt his vocal cords vibrate, felt the air move through his throat, but the words died before they reached his ears. The woman turned. Tyler's mind, trained to observe and categorize, registered details. Asian features, late 20s, gray Patagonia jacket, blue Osprey pack. Everything matched the permit photo. But Patterson had been right. Something about her face was wrong. It wasn't that her features were distorted or inhuman. It was the expression, or rather the complete absence of any expression Tyler could recognize. Her face was a mask of such profound stillness, that it seemed less like neutrality and more like negation, as if every human emotion had been extracted, leaving only a template. Her eyes were open, but they didn't blink, didn't track his movement. They simply existed, dark and depthless, fixed on some point that might have been Tyler, or might have been something only she could see. She wore no hat. Her black hair fell past her shoulders perfectly straight, unmoving despite the breeze Tyler could feel against his own face. Tyler took a step toward the bridge. The woman didn't react. He took another step. She remained motionless, a statue in hiking gear. His rational mind generated hypotheses. Melissa had suffered some kind of medical emergency, stroke, aneurysm, severe hypothermia. The fixed stare could be neurological damage. The lack of response could be altered consciousness. All of this was terrible, but it was explainable. The silence, though, the absolute acoustic void, that remained unexplained. Tyler reached the log bridge. He stepped onto it, feeling the slight give of wood that had weathered decades of Pacific storms. He crossed the 8 feet of creek in 4 strides. When he reached the other side, he was less than 20 feet from Melissa. She was still staring, still not blinking. "Melissa," Tyler said, knowing he couldn't be heard but needing to try. "I'm Tyler Kendrick. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help you." Melissa's mouth opened. No sound emerged, but Tyler watched her jaw unhinge, slowly, mechanically, far wider than human anatomy should allow. Her expression didn't change. That terrible blankness remained, but her mouth kept opening, stretching as if her face was coming undone from the inside. Tyler's body made the decision his conscious mind was still processing. He took 3 steps backward. His hand went to the canister of bear spray on his belt. Irrational, but his fingers needed something to hold on to, some tool that implied control. Melissa's jaw snapped shut. The movement was instantaneous. No gradual closing, just open then closed, like a video skip. She began walking toward him. Her gait was smooth but wrong. Too smooth. No weight shift, no natural sway. She glided forward as if the ground beneath her boots was irrelevant to her motion. Tyler turned and ran. His boots pounded the trail. He felt each impact, felt his lungs working, felt his pack bouncing against his spine. But all of it happened in perfect silence. He didn't look back until he'd covered 50 yards. When he did, the trail behind him was empty. The forest looked normal again, trees moving in the breeze, shadows shifting in the fading light. He stood there gasping for air he couldn't hear entering his lungs, trying to construct an explanation that his methodical mind could accept. Hallucination. Altitude-induced hypoxia, though 800 feet elevation shouldn't cause that. Contaminated water, though he'd drunk from his own tested supply. Fatigue, stress, pattern recognition failure. The sound returned all at once, like a physical pressure releasing. The river roared. Wind rushed through the canopy. A Stellar's jay screamed from somewhere to his left. Tyler actually staggered from the sensory overload. The presence of sound after minutes of absence hit him like a wave. His radio crackled. "Kendrick, Graves Creek. Status check, over." Tyler fumbled for the radio, his hands shaking now that his body had permission to show the fear his mind had been compartmentalizing. "Graves Creek, Kendrick. I'm at mile 7, Pony Creek crossing. I need to report." He stopped. Report what? That he'd seen a woman with a face like an empty room? That sound had temporarily ceased to exist? "Go ahead, Kendrick. I need clarification on the witness report. Doug Patterson, did he describe anything else about the woman's appearance?" A pause, then. "He said she didn't blink. Said it was like watching someone wearing a mask of their own face. Creeped him out so bad he ran back down the mountain." Tyler's mouth was dry. "Copy that. Continuing to mile 10. We'll check in at designated intervals." "Roger. Be advised. Storm system moving in faster than forecast. Might want to consider turning back." Tyler looked at his watch. 5:23 p.m. He had maybe an hour of useful daylight left, less if the clouds thickened. The smart move, the logical move, was to descend, file a report, return tomorrow with a full SR team. But Melissa Hartwell was out here somewhere, and whether what he'd seen was her or some manifestation of her, she needed help. Continuing up trail, Tyler said, "Kendrick out." He started hiking again, forcing himself into a steady pace despite every instinct screaming at him to turn around. His Garmin showed mile 7.4, 3 miles to the valley floor where Melissa's last planned campsite was located. The trail steepened. Tyler's calves burned as he climbed through a series of switchbacks, gaining elevation toward the point where the forest would break open into the glacial valley. The light was failing faster now, filtered through clouds that had turned the color of old bruises. At mile 8.2, he found her pack. It sat in the middle of the trail, upright, as if Melissa had carefully placed it there before continuing on. Tyler approached slowly, documenting with his phone camera before touching anything. The blue Osprey pack was dry, unstained, no visible damage. He keyed his radio. "Graves Creek, Kendrick. I've located the missing hiker's pack. Mile 8.2 trail center. Pack appears intact. No sign of struggle." "Copy. Do you see the hiker?" "Negative." Tyler crouched beside the pack, pulling on nitrile gloves from his SAR kit. He photographed the pack from multiple angles, then carefully opened the main compartment. Everything was organized exactly as it should be. Sleeping bag in its compression sack, tent components bundled together, food bag sealed and properly stored. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. Except the inReach communicator was gone. Tyler checked every pocket, every strap. Melissa's satellite communicator, her primary emergency device, wasn't in the pack. He stood up, scanning the surrounding forest. If she'd kept the inReach on her person, she might have been trying to send a message. But the device had GPS tracking, and dispatch would have alerted the SAR team if any signal had been received, unless the signal was being blocked, or unless Melissa had turned it off, or unless... Tyler's phone buzzed in his pocket. That shouldn't be possible. No cell signal at this elevation. He pulled out the phone. The screen showed a text message from an unknown number. No signal bars, no data connection. Just the message, somehow delivered despite the absence of any network. The text was in Japanese characters. Tyler stared at it, his analytical mind working through the impossibility. Melissa was a Japanese translator. This was clearly connected to her disappearance. But the phone shouldn't be receiving anything at all. He opened his translation app. Thankfully, it could work offline, and photographed the text. The app processed for a moment, then displayed the English translation. "I am still here in the place between. Can you see me? I have been waiting so long. Please help me. Please don't leave me alone with her." Tyler's hands were trembling again. He forced himself to screenshot the message, to document what was happening, even as his rational worldview continued to fracture. Another text arrived, more Japanese characters. He translated it. "She died angry. She died with hate. Now she makes others die the same way. The water, don't drink the water from Pony Creek. That's how she..." The message cut off mid-sentence. Tyler tried to respond, typing, "Where are you?" and hitting send, knowing it was futile. The message failed to send, and a moment later, his phone signal, which shouldn't have existed in the first place, vanished completely. The temperature plummeted. Tyler's breath came in thick clouds now. The moisture in the air was condensing, creating a thin mist that rolled across the trail like something liquid. He pulled out his emergency thermal jacket and put it on, the material crackling stiffly in the sudden cold. Around him, the forest had changed. The moss on the trees looked darker, almost black. The ferns beside the trail had wilted, their fronds curled inward as if recoiling from something toxic. Tyler checked his thermometer, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. That was impossible. The temperature had been 48 degrees 15 minutes ago. A 20-degree drop in 15 minutes would require atmospheric conditions that didn't exist in western Washington in October. He documented it anyway. Photo of the thermometer. Photo of his GPS showing location, date, and time. Photo of the wilted vegetation. A sound reached him through the mist. Not the natural sounds of the forest, but something rhythmic. Deliberate, like footsteps but with a strange doubled quality, as if two sets of feet were walking in perfect synchronization. The footsteps were coming from up trail, from the direction of the valley. Tyler's hand went to his maglite. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the mist, illuminating suspended water droplets that hung in the air too long, defying gravity. Two figures emerged from the fog. One was Melissa Hartwell. Same gray jacket, same black hair, same face with that terrible blank expression. She walked with that too smooth glide, her boots not quite connecting with the ground in a way that Tyler's eyes couldn't fully process. Behind her, matching her stride exactly, was something else. It had the approximate shape of a woman. Tall, thin, dressed in what appeared to be white fabric that hung from its frame like grave clothes. But where Melissa's wrongness was subtle, this thing's wrongness was absolute. Its hair fell past its waist, black and wet, as if it had just emerged from deep water. Its face was pale, the color of drowned flesh, and its eyes were pits of shadow that seemed to pull at the light around them. Tyler's phone buzzed again. He tore his eyes from the approaching figures long enough to glance at the screen. Another message in Japanese. The translation app activated automatically. Run. Don't let her see you. Don't let her touch you. If she touches you, you become like me, between. Neither dead nor alive. Run now. Tyler ran. He abandoned Melissa's pack, abandoned any pretense of rational analysis, and sprinted down the trail. His maglite beam bounced wildly, creating a strobe effect through the mist. Behind him, he heard, or thought he heard, those synchronized footsteps following, moving faster than any human could walk. The trail blurred beneath his feet, roots, rocks, patches of mud. Tyler's hiking boots found purchase through muscle memory alone. His conscious mind was entirely occupied with a single imperative: distance. Get distance. Put space between himself and whatever was behind him. He reached the switchbacks and took them at a reckless pace, skidding around corners, using trees to arrest his momentum. The mist had thickened into genuine fog now, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. At mile 7, the Pony Creek crossing, Tyler stopped to catch his breath. His lungs felt like they were full of ground glass. His legs shook, but he'd gained distance. He could no longer hear the footsteps. The creek gurgled past, black water reflecting nothing in the twilight. Tyler's light played across the surface, and he saw something that made his remaining analytical framework collapse entirely. Bodies in the water, not floating, not drowned. Standing in the creek, submerged to their chests, perfectly still. 3 of them. 4, no, 6. All women, all with long black hair. All staring at the same fixed point ahead of them, their faces blank, their mouths slightly open. Tyler's light passed across their features. They didn't react to the beam, didn't blink, didn't move. One of them was Melissa. She stood in the water in her gray jacket, hands at her sides, eyes open, looking at nothing. Ice had formed in her hair, crystalline structures that caught Tyler's light and scattered it into rainbow fragments. His phone buzzed one final time. The creek. She drowned us here. One by one, over years. Makes us drink, makes us drown, makes us wait. Forever waiting. Forever cold. Obasan tried to warn me. She tried to warn everyone. Yurei, Onryo, spirit of vengeance. We disrespected her resting place. Now we are her rest. Run, before you drink, before she makes you drink. Tyler looked at his water bottle. He'd refilled it at Pony Creek 3 hours ago, when he'd stopped for his check-in. He'd already drunk from it. The cold inside him now wasn't from the temperature. It was something else. Something that started in his stomach and was spreading through his body like ice crystallizing in his veins. His legs felt heavy. Not tired, heavy, as if his bones were filling with water. Tyler tried to take a step back from the creek, but his feet wouldn't move. He looked down and saw that his boots had sunk slightly into the mud at the water's edge. But that wasn't why he couldn't move. The cold had reached his knees. He could feel it climbing, an internal tide that had nothing to do with the October air around him. His rational mind, still fighting, still trying to categorize and explain, understood what was happening even as it rejected the explanation. The water he'd drunk was drowning him from the inside. Tyler tried to key his radio, but his fingers were numb. The Motorola slipped from his belt and landed in the mud with a soft sound that seemed to come from very far away. He managed to pull out his phone, managed to open the camera app, managed to take one final photo. The women standing in the creek, Melissa among them, all of them waiting with infinite patience. The smooth footsteps approached from behind. 2 sets, perfectly synchronized. Tyler couldn't turn his head anymore. Couldn't do anything except stand as the cold reached his chest, his shoulders, his throat. Something touched his back. Fingers like ice water pressed against his spine through his jacket. The touch burned and froze simultaneously, and Tyler felt something shift inside him. Not physically, but in some other dimension he'd never believed existed. His mouth opened without his permission. The cold water that had been pooling inside him began to rise, filling his lungs even though he was breathing air. He was drowning on dry land, drowning in water that existed in a space between states, between life and death, between the physical and whatever came after. The thing behind him leaned close. Tyler couldn't see it, but he could feel its presence, could smell the sharp mineral scent of creek water and something else, rot, hatred, and time compressed into a single overwhelming essence. When it spoke, the voice came from inside his own head, bypassing his ears entirely. It spoke in Japanese, but somehow Tyler understood every word. "You drank from my waters. Now you are mine. Now you wait with the others. Now you help me feed." Tyler's vision was dimming at the edges, but through the narrowing tunnel, he could see the women in the creek more clearly now. He understood that they weren't just standing there. They were anchored, tethered to this place by the same force that was claiming him, and in each of their blank expressions he recognized what he would become. A lure, a trap, something that looked human enough to draw others close, before revealing what it truly was. The last thing Tyler saw before his vision went dark was his own reflection in the black water of Pony Creek. His face was already changing, expression smoothing into that same terrible blankness. His eyes were still open, but the light behind them was fading, being replaced by something else. Something patient and hungry and eternal. Then the darkness took him completely, and Tyler Kendrick ceased to exist as anything recognizable as human. When his consciousness returned, if consciousness was the right word for what he experienced, Tyler was standing in Pony Creek. The water was numbingly cold around his chest. He couldn't feel his legs anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except the presence of the others beside him, similarly submerged, similarly trapped. Melissa stood 3 feet to his left. The woman in white, the Onryo, the vengeful spirit, stood on the bank, patient and eternal, waiting for the next hiker who would stop to refill their water bottle. Tyler tried to move, tried to speak, tried to do anything, but his body was no longer entirely his own. He was between now, neither dead nor alive, existing in a state that had no name in the language of the living. Time passed strangely. Hours might have been minutes. Days might have been hours. The sun rose and set, rose and set. But Tyler registered it only dimly, the way one might notice background music in a distant room. Hikers passed on the trail above. Most didn't stop. Some paused to admire the creek but moved on without approaching the water. Tyler watched them through eyes that no longer blinked, felt something stir in the part of him that used to be human, a warning he couldn't voice, a scream that had no sound. 3 days after Tyler joined the others in the creek, or maybe it was 3 weeks, time had lost meaning. A young couple stopped at the crossing. The woman pulled out a water filter and approached the bank. Tyler felt the Onryo's attention sharpen, felt the entity move behind him, using his presence and Melissa's and the others as camouflage, as proof that this was just a normal creek in a normal forest. The woman knelt at the water's edge, submerging her filter intake. Tyler watched her pump clean, cold water into her bottle, watched her take a long drink, watched her smile at her companion and say something about how refreshing it tasted. They moved on, disappearing up the trail, and Tyler understood that he would be here when she came back, when the water inside her began its work, when she returned, drawn by a compulsion she wouldn't understand, to stand in the creek with the others, to become another lure, another trap, another piece of the Onryo's eternal web of vengeance. The sun set again. The forest grew dark, and Tyler stood in the freezing water of Pony Creek, his mind fragmenting slowly, forgetting who he'd been, remembering only that he was waiting, always cold, always between. The official report filed by Olympic National Park on October 23, 2014, documented the disappearance of park ranger Tyler Kendrick during a routine search and rescue operation. His last radio contact had been at 5:23 p.m. on October 19th, at approximately mile 7 of the Enchanted Valley Trail. SR teams found his radio in the mud near Pony Creek Crossing. His mag light was discovered 20 feet away, still switched on, battery dead. They found his pack at mile 8.2 and Melissa Hartwell's pack beside it, both arranged carefully in the center of the trail. They never found either body. The case files noted several peculiarities that investigators couldn't explain. Tyler's phone, recovered from his pack, contained dozens of photos taken in the hour before his disappearance. Most showed normal forest scenes, but the last 3 images showed something the digital forensics team described as environmental anomalies, areas where the temperature appeared to have dropped dramatically, where vegetation showed signs of flash freezing inconsistent with October weather patterns. The final photo on Tyler's phone showed Pony Creek at twilight. In the image, barely visible in the dark water, were what appeared to be several human figures standing chest deep in the current. The forensics team dismissed them as shadows or debris, artifacts of low light and long exposure. They didn't examine the photo closely enough to see the faces. Melissa Hartwell's grandmother came to Olympic to collect her granddaughter's effects. She spoke with the lead investigator, a conversation that was documented but later buried in the case file's appendices. The grandmother had tried to warn Melissa not to hike alone in the Enchanted Valley. She'd told her granddaughter the old stories that had been passed down through generations of Japanese immigrants to the Pacific Northwest. Stories about Onryo that followed their victims across oceans, that found new hunting grounds in American forests that waited with inhuman patience for those who disrespected the places where they'd died. Melissa had laughed, the grandmother said, called them superstitions. She was American, educated, rational. She didn't believe in vengeful spirits. The grandmother knew better. She'd grown up hearing whispers about Pony Creek, about women who'd gone missing there over the decades, about hikers who reported seeing figures standing in the water, about the inexplicable cold that sometimes descended on that particular stretch of trail. Before she left Olympic, the grandmother made the investigators promise to post warning signs at Pony Creek. Not to drink the water, not to approach after dark, not to stop there alone. The signs were never posted. The recommendation was deemed without scientific basis and was filed away with the other unexplained elements of the case. Pony Creek continues to flow through the Enchanted Valley, cold and clear and beautiful. Hikers still stop there to refill their water bottles. The creek has a reputation among regular Olympic visitors for having the sweetest, coldest water in the entire park. And sometimes, on overcast October evenings when the light is failing and the mist rolls in from the Kinole River, hikers report seeing figures standing in the creek. They describe them as strangely still, oddly expressionless, their faces blank in a way that triggers some primal unease. Most hikers assume they're seeing other visitors. They wave, call out, and when the figures don't respond, they shrug and move on. The figures remain in the water, waiting. Their numbers slowly growing one by one, as patient as the stones at the creek's bottom and just as cold. Among them now are a ranger in a green uniform and a woman in a gray Patagonia jacket, standing side by side, their eyes open, their mouths slightly parted, trapped forever in the space between breath and drowning, between life and death, between the forest and whatever hungry thing has claimed it for its own. The Onryo stands on the bank, dressed in white, dripping with creek water that never dries. She has been waiting for over 60 years, since the night she died in these waters, murdered and abandoned, her rage so pure that death itself could not contain it. She will wait 60 more, 60 after that. She has infinite patience, and Pony Creek will keep flowing, cold and sweet and deadly, offering refreshment to the thirsty, adding to its collection of the trapped, feeding the hunger of something that has forgotten how to be anything but vengeance. Tyler's last coherent thought, before he forgot how to think at all, was a simple observation, the kind his analytical mind had always specialized in. Some things can't be explained. Some things can only be endured. And some things endure forever. Lisa Hoffman found the grave at dawn, but the body inside had been dead for 3 weeks and was still warm. The soil along the Hoh River Trail had been disturbed, not the random upheaval of animals, but methodical excavation. Someone had dug down 4 feet with precision, removing earth in careful layers that now formed a neat mound beside the hole. Lisa's Garmin GPS read 47.8397 degree N, 123.935 p.degree, exactly where the missing person report had indicated Jordan Hayes was last seen. That was October 19th. Today was November 9th, 2008, 21 days. Lisa knelt at the edge of the pit, her Motorola XPR 655D radio silent on her hip. The body lay face up in what remained of a sleeping bag, hands folded across the chest in a position that suggested arrangement rather than accident. Jordan Hayes had been 26 years old, an experienced backpacker from Portland who'd come to Olympic National Park for a solo autumn trek. The missing person case had consumed 3 weeks of search efforts, grid patterns covering 40 square miles of temperate rainforest, and now here was the answer in a hole that shouldn't exist. But the warmth. Lisa's hand hovered above Jordan's exposed forearm. Heat radiated from the skin, not the ambient temperature of decay, but body warmth, the kind that suggested circulation, blood flow, life. She jerked back, stumbling against the wet earth. Her breath came sharp and fast, each inhalation pulling in the smell of disturbed soil and something else, something wrong. Not decomposition exactly, but a sweetness that made her throat close. The Hoh rainforest pressed in around her, Sitka spruce and western hemlock rising 200 feet overhead. November fog drifted between trunks thick with moss, reducing visibility to maybe 30 yards. The forest was never silent. Wind in the canopy, water dripping from ferns, the distant rush of the Hoh River. But right now, those sounds felt manufactured, recorded, like someone had pressed play on a nature soundtrack to fill a void that wanted to remain empty. Lisa forced herself to look again. Jordan Hayes wore the same clothing described in the missing person report: blue North Face jacket, gray hiking pants, Merrell boots. The face showed no obvious trauma, no signs of predation, but the eyes were open, and that was wrong. After 3 weeks exposed to elements and wildlife, there should have been changes. Instead, Jordan Hayes looked like someone who'd fallen asleep 5 minutes ago, except for the hands. They were positioned too deliberately, crossed at the wrists with fingers interlaced. Nobody died like that naturally. Someone had arranged the body, and then dug it back up. Lisa's fingers found her radio. Protocol said call it in immediately, establish a perimeter, wait for the investigation team. But her thumb hovered over the transmit button without pressing, because Jordan Hayes' chest had just moved. Not the settling of gases or tissue. A breath. The jacket had expanded, held, released. The rhythm was wrong, too slow, maybe one breath every 30 seconds. But it was definitely respiration. No. Lisa's voice cracked. No, no, no. She'd seen a dead body before, 14 months ago. Her partner, Tom Chen, caught in a rock slide in North Cascades. She'd held his hand while he died, felt the exact moment life left and the body became just meat. She knew what death looked like, what it felt like, and this wasn't it. But it also wasn't life. Lisa scrambled backward, her boots sliding in mud. The radio fell from her belt, landing near the edge of the grave. She should grab it, call for help, follow procedure. But her body had decided that distance was more important than communication. Jordan Hayes' eyes moved. Not the lids. Those stayed frozen wide. The eyes themselves, the irises, tracking left to find Lisa's position. Recognition sparked in them, not the confused awareness of someone waking from sleep, but focused intelligence. Intent. Lisa ran. The trail behind her was barely visible through fog, but she knew these paths. 4 years as a ranger in Olympic, 3 years before that in Mount Rainier. She'd logged thousands of miles on trails just like this one. Her legs pumped automatically, arms swinging for balance, all the hiking conditioning paying off as she put distance between herself and the grave. Behind her, a sound. Wet earth sliding. Something pulling itself upward. She didn't look back. The Hoh River Trail wound through old-growth forest, root systems creating obstacles that could snap an ankle if you weren't careful. Lisa vaulted over a downed hemlock, her uniform jacket catching on a branch. She yanked free and kept moving. The ranger station was 2 miles west. 2 miles of mud and roots and fog. 2 miles of running from something that should have been dead but was breathing, looking, moving. Tom's voice echoed in her memory. If something feels wrong, Lisa, it probably is. Trust your gut. Get out first. Analyze later. Tom, who was dead because he didn't follow his own advice. Tom, who'd insisted on checking one more area after the weather warning. Tom, who'd been buried under 3 tons of granite while Lisa watched from 50 feet away. She'd taken 8 months off after that. Therapy, medication, the works. When she finally came back to ranger work, she'd requested Olympic specifically because it was different terrain, different mountains, different trees. She'd thought distance would help, but death followed. Lisa burst into a small clearing where the trail split, left toward the ranger station right deeper into the rainforest. She paused, gasping, and that's when she heard it. Not footsteps, not the crash of something running through underbrush, just breathing, that same slow, deliberate respiration she'd heard at the grave. 1 breath every 30 seconds. It was ahead of her, on the trail to the station. Lisa spun toward the right fork, the one leading deeper into Olympic's wilderness. Bad move tactically. It took her away from help, away from roads and backup. But whatever was making that breathing sound was between her and safety, and every instinct screamed that confrontation would be worse than isolation. The right trail narrowed quickly, becoming little more than a deer path. Ferns brushed her legs, leaving wet streaks on her uniform pants. The fog thickened. Within 100 yards, she couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The massive trees created a cathedral effect, their canopy blocking what little November sunlight penetrated the clouds. She slowed to a jog, then a walk, trying to control her breathing. Listen. Orient. Think. Nothing moved in the fog. No breathing sounds, no footsteps. The forest had returned to its normal soundtrack. Water dripping, wind sighing, birds calling from invisible perches. Maybe she'd imagined the breathing ahead. Maybe panic had manufactured threats where none existed. Maybe she was losing it again, just like after Tom died. Lisa found a massive Sitka spruce and put her back against it, sliding down to sit in the moss at its base. Her hands shook. Protocol for finding a body was clear. Secure the scene, radio for backup, establish chain of custody. What was protocol for finding a body that was still warm, still breathing, still watching? There was no protocol for that because it was impossible. Dead was dead. She'd learned that lesson permanently 14 months ago when she'd screamed at Tom to move, to breathe, to stay with her, and his body had just laid there because that's what corpses did. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They didn't track you with their eyes. Unless they weren't really dead. But Jordan Hayes had been missing for 3 weeks. Even if he'd somehow survived, injury, amnesia, whatever, nobody survived 3 weeks without food in these temperatures. And the body had been buried, arranged, positioned like something waiting for a ceremony that hadn't happened yet. Lisa pulled out her personal GPS unit, a backup Garmin E-Trex she always carried. The screen showed her position, 0, 4 miles from the main trail, heading northeast into an area marked on park maps as hazardous terrain, extreme caution advised. She was technically off her assigned patrol area. If she radioed this in, there would be questions about why she'd run instead of following procedure, why she'd left the scene, why she hadn't secured the evidence. Evidence. Like Jordan Hayes was evidence of something rather than someone. She clipped the GPS back to her belt and felt the absence of her radio, still back at the grave wherever she'd dropped it. No communication, no backup, no way to call for help even if she wanted to. Tom's voice again. Solo in the backcountry means you're your own rescue. Every decision matters. Fine. Decision time. Option 1. Go back to the grave, retrieve the radio, call it in properly. Option 2. Continue to the ranger station via the longer route, report what she'd found, let someone else investigate. Option 3. Admit she was having a breakdown and needed to go back on medical leave. The sound of digging erased all 3 options. It came from somewhere ahead, not close, but not distant either. The rhythmic chunk of a shovel or tool biting into earth, then soil being moved. Then the cycle repeating. Methodical. Patient. The sound Jordan Hayes' grave would have made when it was being excavated. Lisa stood slowly, careful not to make noise against the tree bark. The digging continued. She counted. 30 seconds of digging, 10 seconds of silence, 30 seconds of digging. Like breathing. Like the rhythm she'd heard on the trail. Against every survival instinct, Lisa moved toward the sound. She couldn't have explained why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need to prove she wasn't crazy. Maybe something deeper. The same compulsion that made people slow down for car accidents or lean over cliff edges. The human need to see the source of wrongness. The fog made navigation difficult, but the digging sound provided a beacon. Lisa moved from tree to tree using the massive trunks for cover. Her ranger training emphasized wilderness safety and visitor management, not stealth, but she did her best. Step carefully, test each footfall, avoid snapping branches. The trees thinned into another clearing, this one maybe 50 feet across. 7 shapes moved in the fog. Lisa froze behind a hemlock, its trunk wide enough to hide her completely. She counted again to be sure. 7 figures all digging. They worked in a rough circle, each excavating their own hole with the same methodical rhythm. 30 seconds of work, 10 seconds of rest. Perfectly synchronized. None of them had shovels. They used their hands, bare fingers tearing through soil and roots with impossible efficiency. Lisa watched one figure, a woman in hiking clothes, rip through a root as thick as her wrist without apparent effort. The root snapped like dry spaghetti, and the woman continued digging without pause. All 7 wore civilian clothing, hiking gear mostly, in various states of wear. The closest figure, a man in a green fleece, had what looked like a park map folded in his jacket pocket. A tourist. Or had been. None of them seemed to notice Lisa. They dug with focused intensity, never looking up, never pausing except for those precise 10-second intervals. Their breathing matched Jordan Hayes' rhythm. Slow, deliberate, one breath every 30 seconds. Lisa's mind cataloged details automatically, the ranger training kicking in despite terror. 7 bodies, 7 graves, all fresh excavations. The soil was dark and wet, recently disturbed. These graves couldn't be more than a few hours old, but the people digging them had been dead long enough for missing person reports. She recognized 2 of them from case files back at the station. The woman with the snapped root was Michelle Kowalski, disappeared August 2007 while hiking the High Divide Loop. The man in the green fleece was Andrew Patel, lost September 2008 on the Ozette Loop Trail. There were 6 others Lisa didn't recognize, but given the pattern, they were probably missing hikers from years past. All of them dead. All of them digging their own graves. All of them breathing that wrong, slow rhythm. The man in green fleece stopped digging. His head turned, not smoothly, but in a jerking motion like a puppet with tangled strings. His eyes found Lisa through the fog. She didn't wait to see what happened next. Running again, but this time with purpose. The pattern was clear now, even if the mechanism wasn't. Missing hikers in Olympic National Park didn't just disappear. They came back. Changed. Wrong. And they were preparing something. Digging graves in a circle like ceremony. Like ritual, like... Lisa's boot caught on a root, and she went down hard, hands barely catching her before face planted into mud. Pain shot through her left wrist, probably sprained. She rolled onto her back and saw them emerging from the fog. All 7. Moving together with that same jerking puppet motion. Not running, but not walking either. Something in between that covered ground faster than seemed possible. Their eyes reflected what little light penetrated the fog, pupils too wide, irises too bright. Lisa scrambled to her feet and ran left, off any trail entirely. The forest became a maze of ferns and fallen logs. Her injured wrist sent pain signals every time she used it for balance, but adrenaline kept her moving. Behind her, the sound of pursuit, not footsteps, but branches breaking, ferns being crushed, the wet sound of hands and feet moving through underbrush. A voice called out. "Lisa." She nearly fell again. The voice was Tom's. "Lisa, stop running. You can't leave me again." Not possible. Tom was dead, buried in Bellingham. She'd attended the funeral, watched them lower the casket, threw dirt on the lid. Tom was gone. "You left me under the rocks, Lisa. You ran away then, too." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off trees, bouncing through fog. Lisa's vision blurred with tears. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. Tom's death hadn't been her fault. The therapist had said so. The investigation had cleared her. She couldn't have saved him. "Come back, Lisa. Help me dig. We're almost ready." She burst through a curtain of ferns into a small ravine. The ground dropped away sharply, maybe 15 feet down to a creek bed. No time to find another route. Lisa jumped. The landing jarred every bone in her body, her injured wrist screaming protest. She collapsed in shallow water, the cold shocking, but clarifying. Above, at the ravine's edge, figures gathered. 7 of them standing shoulder to shoulder, looking down with those 2 bright eyes. And behind them, an 8th. This one wore a park ranger uniform, Tom's uniform. But the face was wrong, skin too pale, stretched too tight, eyes reflecting light that shouldn't exist in fog. "The Strigoi recognizes strength," the Tom thing said. Its mouth moved incorrectly, lips forming words a half-second after the sounds emerged. That's why it takes those who fight hardest, hikers who push through exhaustion, rangers who won't quit, survivors who should have died but didn't. Lisa's back pressed against the ravine wall, water soaking through her uniform pants. "You're not Tom." Tom is dead. Tom is alive. Tom is Strigoi. The thing's head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "Tom is calling you home." Strigoi isn't real. It's Romanian folklore. Old superstition. The Tom thing smiled and its teeth were wrong. Too many, too sharp, arranged in rows like a lamprey. Folklore is memory. This forest remembers Romania. The settlers brought old things with them. Seeds. Stories. Blood. One of the 7 figures above, the woman in hiking clothes, dropped into the ravine. She landed in a crouch that no human legs could absorb, bones bending in ways joints didn't allow. When she stood, her breathing maintained that slow rhythm, but her eyes were fixed on Lisa with predatory focus. "Michelle Kowalski," Lisa said, trying to ground herself in facts. "Disappeared August 2007. Body never recovered." Michelle's mouth opened, but Tom's voice came out. "Body buried, body rose. Body remembered what it means to be hungry." Another figure dropped into the ravine. Andrew Patel, the man in green fleece. His landing was equally impossible, feet finding purchase on wet stone without slipping. He moved toward Lisa's right while Michelle circled left. Flanking. Pack tactics. Lisa grabbed a rock from the creek bed, hefting it in her good hand. Useless against whatever these things were, but holding it made her feel less helpless. "What do you want?" "To complete the circle." Tom's voice, but from Michelle's mouth now, the ventriloquism disconcerting. 7 buried, 7 risen, 7 digging, the 8th makes the pattern whole. I'm not dead. Not yet. This from Andrew Patel, though the voice shifted. Deeper, older, with an accent Lisa couldn't place. Romanian, maybe. The Strigoi takes the living and makes them walk again. You will dig. You will rise. You will hunger. 3 more figures dropped into the ravine. The circle was tightening, 7 bodies closing in while the Tom Thing watched from above. Lisa's options narrowed to nothing. Fight 7 reanimated corpses in a ravine with a sprained wrist and a rock. Lose badly. Join them in whatever this was. Or use the one advantage she had. They were talking, which meant they wanted something from her beyond simple death. Why me? Lisa kept her voice steady. Olympic has hundreds of hikers. Why target rangers? The Tom Thing descended into the ravine, and this time Lisa saw how it moved. Not jumping, not climbing, flowing. Gravity seemed negotiable. It settled on a rock in the middle of the creek, water parting around its boots without causing splashes. Because you already died, Lisa. Those too many teeth gleamed. 14 months ago in North Cascades, you died when Tom died. Your heart stopped for 47 seconds while you screamed at the rock slide. The EMTs restarted it, but part of you stayed dead. The Strigoi smells that. The places where life stopped and started wrong. Lisa's breathing quickened. She'd never told anyone about the 47 seconds. The report said she'd gone into shock, required medical attention for acute stress response. But her heart had stopped. She remembered the darkness, the sensation of falling inward, the terrible moment when she couldn't remember how to make her lungs work. That's why we chose you, the Tom Thing continued. Death recognizes death, and you'll help us finish what we started. What did you start? The circle of 8, the Strigoi's number. When 8 walk again gather in the place between root and stone, the old thing wakes fully. No more individual graves, no more slow rising. Everyone who died in this forest will stand again. Hundreds, thousands. Olympic will remember what it means to be truly old. Michelle Kowalski lunged. Lisa swung the rock, connecting with Michelle's jaw. The impact should have shattered bone, but Michelle's head just snapped to the side and back with a wet crack. She kept coming. Her hands grabbed Lisa's jacket, fingers impossibly strong, and lifted her off the ground. The 8th grave is dug, Michelle said in Tom's voice. The 8th body rises tonight. Lisa's injured wrist flared as she punched at Michelle's face, neck, anywhere she could reach, like hitting oak. Michelle's grip tightened, squeezing air from Lisa's lungs. Black spots danced across vision. This was it. This was how it ended. Reanimated corpse strangling her in a ravine while 6 others watched. Tom's face filled her fading vision. Sleep, Lisa. Rest. Wake up different. The sound that saved her was unexpected. A helicopter. The distinctive whump-whump of rotors cut through the fog, distant but approaching. Someone had noticed she was missing. Someone had initiated search protocol. The Park Service's Eurocopter AS-350 could be overhead in minutes. Michelle's grip loosened fractionally. The 7 corpses all turned their heads in unison, tracking the sound. The Tom Thing hissed. Not a human sound, but something serpentine and ancient. They found the radio, it said. They're coming. Lisa drove her knee into Michelle's midsection. No effect, but the distraction was enough. She twisted, used her weight, and both of them went down into the creek. The cold water was shocking, but Lisa had trained for water rescue. She knew how to move in currents, how to use water as cover. She kicked hard, pushing away from Michelle, and let the creek carry her downstream. The ravine deepened, water flowing faster. Behind her, voices called out, some in English, some in that Romanian accented language, all overlapping in discordant harmony. The helicopter sound grew louder, rotors beating fog into eddies, searchlight probably scanning the canopy. Lisa let herself go limp, conserving energy, letting the current do the work. Her ranger training included wilderness survival. When lost, follow water downstream. It always leads somewhere. The creek widened, picking up speed. Lisa grabbed at rocks to slow her descent, her injured wrist protesting every grip. The helicopter was directly overhead now, its searchlight probing through breaks in the canopy. She wanted to signal, to wave, to scream for help, but the current was too strong and her body too exhausted. A waterfall. Small, maybe 8 feet, but enough to send her over with stomach-lurching suddenness. She dropped, hit a deep pool, went under. The water was numbingly cold, fed by snowmelt from the Olympic peaks. Her lungs burned. Which way was up? Everything was dark and spinning. Her head broke surface. She gasped, coughed, gasped again. The pool emptied into a wider stream that merged with... Yes, she could hear it. The Hoh River. The ranger station was on the Hoh. If she could reach the river, follow it downstream, she'd eventually hit the station or the road or somewhere with people and sanity. Behind her, 7 figures stood at the waterfall's edge, backlit by the helicopter's searchlight. They didn't jump, didn't follow, just watched with those 2 bright eyes as the current carried Lisa away. Tom's voice echoed across the water. The 8th grave is dug. You can run, but you'll come back. The Strigoi always brings them back. Lisa flipped onto her back, using a survival backstroke to navigate. The helicopter circled, searchlight sweeping systematic patterns. They were looking for her, but between the fog and the forest canopy, the odds of visual contact were slim. She needed to reach the Hoh, find a clearing, signal the chopper. The stream merged with the river. She felt the change in current, the power of real volume. The Hoh in November was swollen with rain, moving fast but not whitewater dangerous. Lisa angled toward the southern bank, looking for a place to pull out. Her body was shutting down from cold and exhaustion, hypothermia creeping in at the edges. There, a gravel bar with driftwood logs. Lisa kicked hard, caught an eddy, dragged herself onto stones. Her uniform was soaked, adding dangerous weight. Training said strip off wet clothes, but that meant exposure. She compromised, removing her jacket and wringing out what water she could. The helicopter was moving away, searching upstream. Lisa didn't have her radio to call them back. Didn't have anything except her GPS unit, and a body that wanted nothing more than to collapse and sleep. Sleep. Like Michelle Kowalski had slept after she died. Like Tom slept under the rocks in North Cascades. Sleep that turned into something else. Something wrong. Lisa forced herself to stand. The ranger station was 2 miles downstream. She could make 2 miles. She'd hiked hundreds of miles in worse conditions. Except she'd never done it after nearly being killed by reanimated corpses that spoke with her dead partner's voice. The forest pressed in on both sides of the river, dark and watching. Every shadow could hide one of them. Every sound could be their wrong breathing, their puppet movements. Lisa walked the gravel bar downstream, staying close to the water where the trees thinned and visibility was better. Her mind kept circling back to what the Tom thing had said. Strigoi, Romanian folklore, vampire mythology, but different from the Dracula version. She'd read about it years ago in a comparative mythology class. Strigoi were the troubled dead, people who died wrong and came back with intelligence and purpose. Not mindless zombies, not sparkly vampires. Something in between, predatory and patient. And according to the legend, Strigoi could be created by witchcraft, by dying violently, or by dying alone and unburied. All of Olympic's missing hikers fit that profile, lost in the wilderness, bodies unrecovered, deaths unwitnessed. But legends weren't real. They were stories, cultural ways of processing death and fear. They couldn't actually animate corpses. Except Michelle Kowalski had lifted her off the ground with one hand. Tom's face had been on something that wasn't Tom. 7 graves had been dug by people who should have been too dead to hold shovels. Lisa's foot caught on a submerged log, and she went down again, hands splashing into the shallows. Her injured wrist sent white-hot pain up her arm. She stayed there on hands and knees, river water flowing around her fingers, and finally let herself break. The sobs came hard and ugly, fueled by 14 months of suppressed trauma, and 3 hours of impossible terror. Tom was dead. She'd accepted that. She'd done the work, processed the grief, learned to function again. And now, something was using his face, his voice, twisting him into a weapon designed specifically to destroy her. Not fair. Not fair that death wouldn't just be death. Not fair that she'd survived North Cascades only to face something worse in Olympic. Not fair that the world contained things like Strigoi, things that made corpses walk and talk, and... A hand touched her shoulder. Lisa screamed and spun, her good hand grabbing for the nearest weapon. A rock, a branch, anything. "Ranger Hoffman, are you okay?" Real voice, real person, a man in a park visitor's jacket, looking concerned and confused, alive, breathing at normal human intervals. Lisa's hand shook, still gripping a rock she'd somehow grabbed. "Who are you?" "David Walsh. I'm camping at Ho Campground. I heard the helicopter and came to see if someone needed help." He took a step back, hands raised. "You're hypothermic. We need to get you warm." Every instinct screamed trap. One of them has to be. Look at his eyes. Too bright. Look at his breathing. Too slow. But David Walsh's eyes were normal brown, reflecting no light they shouldn't. His breathing was quick and elevated like someone who'd been jogging. And his hands were shaking slightly, the way humans' hands shake when they're nervous or cold. Human. Please let him be human. "The ranger station," Lisa managed through chattering teeth. "How far?" "Half-mile. Can you walk?" She nodded. David helped her stand, and his hand was warm and solid and wonderfully normal. They walked together along the riverbank, David supporting her when she stumbled. The helicopter sound had faded completely. The forest was just a forest again, trees and ferns and the sound of water. "What happened?" David asked. "Were you attacked?" "I found..." Lisa stopped. What could she say? "I found 7 reanimated corpses digging graves in a circle. There's something in Olympic that brings dead hikers back as Romanian vampires. My dead partner tried to recruit me into an undead cult." "I found a body," she said finally. "Jordan Hayes, the missing person from 3 weeks ago." "Jesus, where?" "Ho River Trail, mile marker 47. The lie came easily. Anywhere except the truth. I need to report it. Get an investigation team." The ranger station emerged from the fog, a blessedly familiar wooden building with solar panels and communication equipment. Lights were on inside. Lisa could see Ranger Martinez through the window, probably coordinating the helicopter search. David helped her to the door and Lisa fell against it, suddenly unable to make her legs work properly. The door opened and Martinez caught her. "Hoffman, Christ, where have you been? We found your radio at..." He stopped, taking in her soaked uniform, her injured wrist, the way her whole body shook. "Medic, now. Walsh, get the first aid kit." They brought her inside, wrapped her in emergency blankets, started treating hypothermia. Lisa let them work, her mind distant from her body. Safe. She was safe. Humans. All humans. Normal breathing, normal movements, normal everything. Martinez was talking. "Found your radio at a disturbed gravesite. Empty grave. What the hell happened out there?" "Body," Lisa said. "Jordan Hayes. But it was... wrong." Wrong how? How could she explain? The warmth, the breathing, the way Jordan's eyes had tracked her movement. Martinez would think she'd had a breakdown, send her back on medical leave, maybe force a psych eval. But if she didn't warn them, they'd send someone else to investigate the grave. Someone who'd become the 8th. "There were others," she said. "In the forest, moving wrong." Martinez exchanged a glance with Walsh. The look said it all. She's in shock, not thinking clearly, probably hypothermic confusion. "We'll send a team at first light," Martinez said gently. "Right now you need rest. Walsh, can you stay with her while I coordinate with the search team?" David nodded, settling into a chair across from Lisa. Martinez stepped outside to use the radio, leaving them alone. Lisa studied David Walsh carefully. Mid-30s, camping gear that looked well used but maintained, the kind of person who came to Olympic regularly. His breathing remained steady and normal. His eyes stayed a consistent brown. Nothing wrong about him. "You don't believe me," Lisa said. "I believe you found something that scared you." David's tone was careful. Olympic can be disorienting. Fog, isolation, stress, they play tricks on perception. Not tricks. Lisa pulled the emergency blanket tighter. Real. There are people in the forest who shouldn't be walking, missing hikers from years ago. They're changed. David was quiet for a long moment. Then, how many years ago? The question's specificity surprised her. What? The missing hikers. How far back do they go? I recognized 2 from case files. August 2007, September 2008. But there were others I didn't know. David's expression shifted. Not disbelief, but something else. Recognition? Fear. "My sister disappeared in Olympic," he said quietly. 4 years ago, Rachel Walsh. She was hiking the Enchanted Valley Trail and never came back. They searched for 6 weeks. Found nothing. Lisa's stomach dropped. "David, I come back every year, look for signs, closure I guess, but sometimes I think I see her." He met Lisa's eyes. "In the fog. At a distance. Moving wrong, like you said. I always thought it was grief. Wishful thinking twisted into hallucination." "It's not hallucination." "How do you know?" "Because 7 of them tried to kill me. Because 1 wore my dead partner's face. Because they spoke about Romanian folklore in circles of 8 and old things waking. Because 1 of them touched me," Lisa said instead. "Real. Solid. Stronger than any human should be." The door opened. Martinez came back in, his expression grim. "Helicopter found something," he said. 7 fresh excavations in a circle about half a mile from where we found your radio. Empty graves, all of them. And tracks leading away in multiple directions." He paused. "They also found boot prints matching Jordan Hayes' pattern. Moving. Recent." David stood abruptly. "Where?" "Northeast. Toward the restricted area." Martinez looked at Lisa. "What happened out there, Hoffman? And don't tell me you don't remember. I need the truth." Lisa closed her eyes. The truth would end her career. Psych evaluation. Medical discharge. Nobody would believe Strigoi. But people were in danger. Martinez, the helicopter crew, anyone who went looking for those graves. "The missing persons," she said. "They're not dead. Not exactly. They're..." A sound outside. That distinctive slow breathing. 1 breath every 30 seconds. All 3 of them heard it. Martinez went pale. "What the fuck is that?" David moved to the window, peering into the fog. "There's someone out there." "No." "Multiple someones." Lisa forced herself to stand, crossing to the window despite her body's protests. 7 figures stood in a semicircle around the ranger station. Michelle Kowalski, Andrew Patel, 5 others she hadn't seen clearly before, all watching with those 2 bright eyes, and behind them the Tom thing, smiling with too many teeth. "They followed me," Lisa whispered. "I led them here." Martinez grabbed the radio. "Base, this is Ho Station. We have a situation." The power died. Lights out. Computer screens black. Radio dead. Even the emergency lighting failed. Only the dim November daylight through the windows provided illumination. "Generator," Martinez said. "Walsh, help me." "No." Lisa grabbed his arm. "Don't go outside. That's what they want." "Who wants? What are you?" Glass shattered. Michelle Kowalski came through the window in an explosion of broken glass and splintered frame. She landed in the middle of the room, bones articulating wrong but holding her upright. Her mouth opened and Tom's voice emerged. "The 8th grave is dug. The circle must close." Martinez pulled his service weapon, a Sig Sauer P226 the Park Service authorized for wildlife defense. He fired twice, center mass, textbook shots. Michelle jerked with each impact but didn't fall. Didn't bleed. Just turned those two bright eyes on Martinez and smiled. "Bullets don't work on the dead," she said in her own voice this time, raspy from disuse, but definitely female. "We tried, before we stopped fighting." David grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, swinging it like a club. He connected with Michelle's head, a blow that should have fractured her skull. She caught the extinguisher on its return swing, ripping it from his hands with one smooth motion, and threw it through another window. "Run," Lisa said. "Back door, now." They ran. Martinez first, then David, then Lisa bringing up the rear. Behind them, Michelle's laughter, genuinely amused, like this was all a game she knew she'd win eventually. The back door led to a service area with a parking lot and maintenance shed. Martinez's truck sat nearby, a Park Service F-150 with emergency equipment. He fumbled for keys, got the door open. "Get in." David climbed into the passenger seat. Lisa hesitated at the truck bed, looking back. The 7 figures emerged from the station, moving in that synchronized puppet motion. But they weren't rushing, weren't hurrying at all, because they knew something Lisa didn't. "Hoffman, get in the goddamn truck!" She climbed in the back as Martinez started the engine. Tires spun on wet gravel, found traction, and the truck lurched forward. The access road led to Highway 101, civilization help. They just had to make it 5 miles. The Tom thing stood in the middle of the road. Martinez swerved, but not fast enough. The impact should have killed anything human. 2 tons of truck at 40 miles per hour. The Tom thing shattered the windshield, rolled over the hood, disappeared under the wheels. Martinez fought for control as the truck fishtailed, hydroplaned, and finally slammed into a massive Sitka spruce. The airbags deployed with explosive force. Lisa was thrown forward in the truck bed, her injured wrist taking another hit. Everything was pain and ringing ears, and the smell of deployed airbags. She pulled herself up. Martinez was slumped over the wheel, unconscious but breathing. David was clutching his arm, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, but alert. "Is it dead?" David asked. "Please tell me we killed it." Lisa looked back at the road. The Tom thing was standing up, bones bent at wrong angles, snapping back into place with wet cracks. Its uniform was shredded, skin torn, but it was standing, walking toward them, smiling. "The Strigoi doesn't die twice," it said. "That's the point." The other 6 were coming down the road behind it. 7 reanimated corpses, 3 injured humans, 5 miles from help. Lisa grabbed the emergency kit from the truck bed, pulled out road flares. They burned at 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite thermite, hot enough to make even undead flesh burn. She struck the first flare, the red flame brilliant in the fog. "Get Martinez out. Move." David kicked open the passenger door, dragging Martinez from the driver's seat. Lisa stood in the truck bed, flare held high. "Strigoi burn," she said. "I researched it in college. Fire and decapitation. That's how the old legends say to kill them." The Tom thing stopped, its head tilted at that impossible angle. "You learned well," it said, "but fire needs to burn long enough. We're fast when we need to be." Lisa threw the flare at its feet. The Tom thing moved, but not fast enough. Fire caught its leg, spreading across the synthetic fabric of the Park Service uniform. It didn't scream, didn't react at all, just stood there burning while its skin blackened and cracked. "The flame that never dies," it said. "The hunger that never stops. Fire just makes us different." The burning figure took a step forward. Lisa lit 3 more flares, throwing them in an arc. A wall of red flame between them and the 7 corpses. It wouldn't hold long, but it might give them minutes. "David, can you carry Martinez?" "I think so." "Then we move. Stay in the road. Stay visible. The helicopter will make another pass." They moved as quickly as 2 injured people carrying a third could manage. Behind them, the wall of flames. Beyond that, the sound of the Strigoi walking through fire, their bodies burning but still animate, still hunting. The fog was lifting slightly, not much but enough that visibility improved to maybe 100 yards. Lisa could see the road curving ahead, following the Ho River's path toward 101. The helicopter had to be out here somewhere, still searching. David was struggling with Martinez's weight. The ranger was starting to come around, groaning but not fully conscious. Lisa helped support his other side, and together they made awkward progress. The sound of footsteps behind them. Slow, patient, the breathing rhythm unmistakable. Lisa didn't look back. Looking back meant acknowledging how close they were, how inevitable the catch. Forward. Just keep moving forward. A new sound cut through the fog. A car engine. Headlights appeared around the curve. A civilian vehicle, a Subaru Outback, probably tourists heading to the park. The driver saw 3 bloody, desperate people on the road and hit the brakes. The window rolled down. Jesus, what happened? Do you need... Drive back, Lisa said. Turn around and get to 101. Radio for help. Multiple casualties. The driver, a woman in her 50s, stared at them. You need a hospital. Get in. No time. They're coming. Who's coming? The 7 figures emerged from the fog behind them. Still walking. Still synchronized. Still burning. The flames had mostly died, but charred flesh continued to smolder. The Tom thing led them, its face a ruins of burnt tissue that somehow still smiled. The woman in the Outback made a sound halfway between a scream and a prayer. She threw the car into reverse, tires spinning. Too slow. Michelle Kowalski moved faster than human, covering 30 feet in seconds. She grabbed the Outback's front bumper and flipped the entire car onto its side. The woman inside screamed, trapped behind the airbag. No one leaves, Michelle said in Tom's voice. The circle must close. The 8th must fall. Lisa's mind raced. They couldn't outrun these things, couldn't fight them. Fire had barely slowed them. The helicopter was useless. Even if it saw them, what would it do? The Strigoi were too fast, too strong, too relentless. But they wanted something specific. The circle must close. 8 graves, 8 bodies. The Strigoi needed them alive enough to dig, to complete some kind of ritual, which meant they had leverage. Lisa pulled out her last flare, struck it, and held the burning end to her own throat. Stop, she said, or I finish it here. No 8th grave, no circle. The 7 corpses froze. All of them at once, like puppets with cut strings. The Tom thing's burnt face registered something that might have been surprise. You wouldn't, it said. I survived my partner dying. I survived 14 months of guilt. I survived today. You think I'm afraid of finishing what I should have let happen in North Cascades? The bluff was complete. Lisa didn't want to die, but the Strigoi didn't know that. The circle can be broken, Lisa continued. You need 8. 7 does nothing. I die now. You wait another year, another decade, for someone else strong enough, or you let us go. The Tom thing considered this. Its burnt lips moved, speaking in that Romanian accent. The Strigoi is patient. We have time. This forest has time. Then we're at an impasse, or a negotiation. The thing took a step forward. You walk away, today, but you come back, eventually. The touched always return to death, and when you do, the circle will be ready. You'll let them go? Lisa gestured to Martinez, David, the woman in the Outback. All of them? All of them. This time. The Tom thing smiled with its ruined face. But the graves remain dug. The dead remain walking. Olympic remembers. And you, Lisa Hoffman, you carry the mark now. The place where your heart stopped and started wrong. That mark will call you back. Lisa lowered the flare slightly. How do I know you'll keep your word? The Strigoi do not lie. We do not need to. Truth is more terrible than deception. It turned to the other 6. Inapoi. Lasatsi. The corpses retreated into the fog, moving as one, their synchronized breathing fading into the distance. The Tom thing watched Lisa for another long moment. 14 months ago, I died, it said. Rocks fell, bones broke, life ended. But I came back because you couldn't let go. Your grief called me from stone and soil. You made me Strigoi, Lisa. You and your desperate prayers to a dead man. That's not goodbye, partner. Until you return, it dissolved into fog, leaving only the sound of burning wood and the woman crying in the overturned outback. Lisa stood on the road, flare still burning, her whole body shaking. David moved to help the trapped woman. Martinez was sitting up now, confused but conscious. And somewhere in the distance, the helicopter's rotors cut through the November air. Help was coming. Explanations would need to be invented. Reports would be filed. The official story would involve dangerous wildlife, possible bear attack, mass hysteria from hypothermia and stress. But Lisa knew the truth. Olympic National Park harbored something ancient, something that took the dead and made them walk again, something that needed 8 bodies to complete a ritual that would wake horrors she couldn't imagine. And somewhere in that vast wilderness, 7 graves waited, patient, ready. The helicopter appeared overhead, searchlight finding them at last. Lisa watched it descend, bringing rescue and normalcy and the illusion of safety. But she could still hear them in the fog, breathing slow and patient. 1 breath every 30 seconds. The rhythm of the Strigoi, the breath of the troubled dead, waiting for the 8th. 3 months later, Lisa Hoffman submitted her resignation to the National Park Service. The official reason was medical retirement following traumatic injury sustained in the line of duty. The unofficial reason was that she couldn't sleep anymore, couldn't close her eyes without seeing Tom's burned face or hearing that slow, patient breathing. She moved to Seattle, got a job doing data entry for an insurance company, lived in a studio apartment on the 8th floor, high enough that she could see the Olympic Mountains on clear days, a reminder of what waited in those forests. She went to therapy, took medication, tried to build a normal life. But sometimes on foggy November mornings, Lisa would wake up tasting earth. Not the clean soil of gardens or parks, but the deep earth smell of graves. And she would know with absolute certainty that somewhere in Olympic National Park, 7 figures were still digging, waiting for the circle to close, waiting for her to come home. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The cold hit David Ramirez 3 miles before it should have. Not the crisp Montana autumn that had followed him up the Grinnell Glacier Trail. This was January cold, bone deep and wrong, seeping through his ranger jacket like the fabric had turned to gauze. August shouldn't feel like this. The aspen leaves around him still wore their summer green, untouched by frost, yet his breath clouded white in the air, and his fingers had gone numb inside his gloves. The smell came next, rot and copper and something underneath that made his throat close. A sweet chemical wrongness that didn't belong in any forest David had ever walked. He'd smelled death before. This wasn't that. This was older. Connor Burke's campsite sat in a clearing at the 6,400-foot mark, exactly where the GPS coordinates from his last check-in had placed it. David's Garmin unit had worked perfectly until he'd crossed some invisible threshold 200 yards back. Now the screen flickered between his location and blank static, the satellite signal cutting in and out like something was interfering with the signal from orbit. The tent still stood. That was the first wrong thing David cataloged, his mind slipping into the clinical assessment mode that had kept him functional for the 3 years since Rachel died. Orange north face dome tent, stakes driven properly, no tears in the fabric. Rain fly secured, everything exactly as it should be. Except Connor Burke had missed his last 2 radio checks and the tent was coated in a thin layer of frost that David watched actively spreading across the nylon as he approached. Crystalline fingers reaching across the material despite the afternoon sun beating down on the clearing. David's Motorola radio crackled. He grabbed it from his belt, hoping for dispatch, for any voice that would make this feel less like walking into one of his nightmares. Static, then something underneath the static. Not words exactly, but a rhythm that made him think of breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. He turned the volume down and clipped it back to his belt. Rachel had died in weather like this. Unexpected cold snap in April. Hypothermia setting in faster than they could get her back to the trailhead. He'd carried her body for 7 miles, feeling her grow lighter with each step, as if the cold was taking something more than just her warmth. The department therapist had said it was shock, the way trauma could distort memory. David had learned to nod and agree while knowing the truth. Rachel's body had weighed less at the end because something had been eating her from the inside. He'd seen her eyes before she died, seen the hunger there. He pushed the thought away and moved toward the tent. His boots crunched on frost-stiffened grass. The temperature had to be below 20 degrees in this pocket of clearing, a meteorological impossibility the weather service would never believe. David pulled out his notepad, waterproof paper, mechanical pencil, the kind of equipment you learn to trust after enough seasons. He documented everything: frost patterns, temperature differential, the way the cold seemed to emanate from the tent itself, like it was the source rather than the victim. He called out, "Connor Burke, Park Service." His voice fell flat in the clearing, absorbed by something that shouldn't be there. No echo from the rocky slope beyond. No response. David unzipped the tent. The sound was too loud, teeth on fabric, and the smell rolled out in a wave that made him stagger back. Not rot, worse. The sweetness of starvation, ketones, and something else. Something that smelled the way hunger felt when it stopped being about food and became pure void. Inside the tent, Connor Burke's sleeping bag still laid out. His pack, contents spilled but not ransacked. Energy bars torn open but uneaten, their wrappers shredded. Water bottles frozen solid. A journal, pages stiff with ice. And on every surface scratched into the frost, carved into the sleeping bag fabric, drawn in what looked like dried blood on the tent floor. Symbols David didn't recognize but understood at a level below language. Spirals within spirals. Mouths with too many teeth. Words in a language that hurt to look at. The last entry in Connor's journal was dated 4 days ago, 2 days before his missed check-in. David read it crouching in the tent entrance, his headlamp beam shaking. Can't stop thinking about eating. Haven't been hungry in years, not really, but now it's all I can think about. The energy bars taste like nothing. Everything tastes like nothing. There's something in the trees. I think it's been following me since the trail junction. I think it wants me to follow it. I'm so hungry. The handwriting deteriorated through the entry, letters growing jagged, pressing so hard into the paper they tore through in places. The final words were barely legible. It showed me what I really am. David backed out of the tent, his tactical training warring with something more primitive. He should call this in, set up a perimeter, wait for the search team, but his radio showed no signal bars, and the cold was getting worse, spreading from the clearing like an infection. The aspens at the edge of the frost zone were starting to show ice on their bark. He found the tracks 15 feet from the tent. Connor's boots. David recognized the tread pattern from the profile photo in the missing person report. Size 11 Merrills, standard issue. The tracks led northwest, toward the higher elevations and the glacier itself. They were deep, pressed into earth that should have been soft but was frozen hard. But the distance between steps was wrong. 7 feet, 9 feet, 11 feet between impressions, as if Connor had been running flat out or... David's mind supplied the image before he could stop it, leaping, bounding like an animal. The boot prints turned into something else after 30 yards, the same intervals but the impressions changed, longer, the toes digging deeper than the heels, and then, another 20 feet up the trail, the boots themselves, both of them, laces still tied, lying on their sides like Connor had simply walked out of them mid-stride. The tracks continued beyond the boots, bare feet now, or something approximating feet. 5 toes, but too long. The big toe separated from the others at an angle that would have broken a human's foot. The stride lengthened further. 12 feet. 15 feet. 20 feet between impressions, as if Connor was covering ground in impossible leaps. David followed them. He knew it was a mistake even as he did it, his legs moving with an automation that felt like someone else was operating his body. This was how you got killed in the backcountry, splitting from protocol, pursuing without backup, letting emotion override training. But Rachel's voice was in his head, the way she'd sounded before the cold took her. Don't leave me out here. He wouldn't leave Connor out here. The trail climbed, switchbacking up a rocky slope where snow should have been in August. The temperature continued dropping. David's gear thermometer read 8 degrees Fahrenheit. His breath came in gasps now, not from exertion but from the way the cold seemed to be reaching inside his lungs and pulling out the warmth directly. His fingers were beyond numb, moving like wooden clubs when he tried to flex them. The tracks led to a cave opening in the granite face. Not a natural cave, David realized as he approached. Carved, or clawed. The entrance was 8 feet high, perfectly rounded, and the stone around it was covered in the same spiral symbols from Connor's tent. They seemed to move in his peripheral vision, writhing like living things. David's headlamp beam couldn't penetrate the darkness inside. He switched on his mag light, the LED beam usually good for 300 yards. It died 10 feet inside the entrance, swallowed by a darkness that felt solid. He heard Connor then. Not words. A sound somewhere between sobbing and laughter, echoing from deep inside the mountain. And under that, chewing. The wet, methodical sound of something being consumed. Connor. David's voice cracked. Connor Burke, this is Ranger Ramirez. I'm coming in. The chewing stopped. In the silence that followed, David heard his own heartbeat. Too fast, hammering like he'd sprinted a mile. Then Connor's voice, but wrong, stretched out and distorted like a recording played at the wrong speed. So hungry, David. Can't you feel it? Can't you feel how empty you are? David hadn't told Connor his name, had never met the man before this assignment. But somehow Connor knew. Come out, Connor, we can get you help. Laughter now, genuine but terrible, echoing from multiple points in the cave simultaneously. Help? I tried help, therapy, medication, diet after diet after diet. Nothing worked, nothing filled it, but this. The voice changed, dropping to something that resonated in David's chest like a bass note. This understands. This knows what we really are, what we've always been. David stepped into the cave. The darkness wrapped around him, tactile and hungry. His boot struck something that clattered. Bones, he realized, looking down. Human bones. No, multiple sets of human bones, piled in the entrance like a threshold marker. Some of them showed teeth marks. Some had been cracked open for the marrow. His light found Connor Burke 10 feet inside. Or what had been Connor Burke. The man stood 7 feet tall now, stretched vertically like taffy, his spine visible through translucent skin that had taken on a blue-white color. His ranger uniform hung in tatters from a frame that had added too many joints to still be human. But his face was almost recognizable, if you could ignore the way his jaw had extended, the way his teeth had grown and multiplied, filling his mouth with sharp yellow ivory. Connor's eyes met David's. They were completely black, reflective like an animal's in the headlamp beam, and they were crying. I couldn't stop eating, Connor whispered, his voice his own again for just a moment. Started with the energy bars, then the bark, then... He gestured at the bones. I met them on the trail, honeymooning couple, they were so kind. Asked if I needed help, I was so hungry. David's hand went to his service weapon, a Glock 22 that suddenly felt absurdly inadequate. Connor, listen to me. This isn't you. Something happened to you, something woke up what was always there, Connor finished. His body shifted, bones creaking, adding another foot to his height. You know this, David. You felt it with Rachel. You watched it happen and you knew. The hunger isn't new. It's old. Older than these mountains. It's what we are underneath everything we pretend to be. David's finger found the trigger. That's not true. Isn't it? Connor took a step forward, his new joints bending in ways that made David's stomach turn. Why did you come alone? Why didn't you wait for backup? You came because you understood. Because you've been hungry too, since Rachel died, since you watched her eyes change, since you felt the relief when she was finally gone, and you didn't have to feel guilty about wanting to leave her. The words hit like physical blows. David had never told anyone about those thoughts, the terrible secret relief he'd felt mixed with his grief when Rachel died, the freedom from her constant needs, her depression, her weight on his life, the shame that had been eating him for 3 years. "You're lying." But his voice shook. Connor laughed, and the sound echoed off the cave walls from a dozen different angles. "The Wendigo doesn't lie. It just shows what's already there. The hunger. The emptiness. We spend our whole lives trying to fill it with food, with people, with purpose. But it never works. Nothing works. We're hollow, David. We're all hollow. And this..." He spread his arms, bones crackling. "This at least is honest." David fired. 3 shots, center mass, the training automatic response. The reports were deafening in the enclosed space. Connor staggered back, dark fluid leaking from the wounds. Then he smiled, and his teeth caught the light like knives. "You can't kill hunger, David." Connor lunged. David dove sideways, feeling claws rake across his shoulder, shredding fabric and skin. He rolled, came up firing, emptied the magazine into the thing that had been Connor Burke. Each impact made Connor stagger, but none stopped him. The wounds closed as David watched, the flesh knitting together with unnatural speed. David ran, back through the cave entrance, out into the impossible cold, down the trail with Connor's laughter chasing him. His shoulder burned, blood freezing to his jacket. His lungs screamed for air that wasn't there. Behind him, he heard Connor bounding down the slope, those 2 long strides eating up the distance. He wouldn't make it to the trailhead. David knew that with absolute certainty. Connor was faster now, tireless, driven by a hunger that was literally supernatural. David's only chance was the cliff. The trail switchbacked past a 100-foot drop, the kind of exposure that made day hikers nervous. David altered course, angling for it, his plan forming in the desperate clarity of mortal terror. Connor landed in front of him, cutting off his escape. Up close, the transformation was complete. Almost nothing human remained except those crying eyes trapped in a monster's face. "I'm sorry," Connor said, and David heard genuine grief in the distorted voice. "I'm so hungry." David raised his empty gun, knowing it was futile. "Connor, fight it. You're still in there." "I tried." Connor's voice broke. "I tried so hard, but it's stronger. It's always been stronger. Since I was 8 years old, sneaking food, binging, purging, hating myself. This is just honest. This is what I always was." David saw his opening. He lowered the gun. "You're wrong." Connor hesitated, confusion flickering across his inhuman features. "The hunger isn't who you are," David continued, his voice steady despite the terror. "It's what happened to you. It's what this place, this thing did to you, but you're still making choices. You're still here talking to me, fighting it enough to cry about what you've done. I can't stop it." But Connor's voice sounded more human, younger. "You don't have to stop it." David took a step back toward the cliff edge. "You just have to let it follow me." Understanding dawned in Connor's black eyes. "No, David, no. I'm already gone," David said softly. "Part of me died with Rachel. I've been walking around empty for 3 years. You know that's true. You can feel it. That's the Wendigo talking. That's not real. Maybe." David smiled. "Or maybe this is the most honest thing I've ever done. I couldn't save Rachel, but I can save you from becoming what I almost became." Connor lunged, but David was already moving, throwing himself backward off the cliff. He saw Connor's hand swipe through empty air, saw the horror and relief warring on that transformed face, saw the human tears on inhuman cheeks. Then he was falling, the cold mountain air rushing past, and for the first time in 3 years, David Ramirez felt like he wasn't hungry anymore. They found David Ramirez 3 days later, or what remained of him. The fall should have killed him instantly, but the snow had drifted deep in the ravine, creating a cushion that left him alive just long enough. The rescue team noted extensive claw marks on his body, attributed to a mountain lion in their official report. They documented the severe frostbite, the hypothermia, the way he'd scratched symbols into his own skin before dying. Trauma response, they said. The mind breaking under impossible circumstances. They never found Connor Burke. The cave was empty when they searched it, bones scattered but no body. The theory was that Connor had attacked David, then fled deeper into the wilderness. Search efforts continued for 2 weeks before winter made the high country impassable. One of the searchers, a young ranger named Michelle Torres, reported finding something strange at the 7,200-foot elevation. A set of human footprints in early snow, boots with morel treads, walking calmly downslope toward civilization. The prints were normal, human, the stride length appropriate. She followed them for a quarter mile before they reached the maintained trail and vanished into the traffic of other hikers. Her report was filed and forgotten. Nobody wanted to believe that Connor Burke had walked out of the mountains as human as he'd walked in, carrying the memory of what he'd been and what he'd chosen not to become. Nobody wanted to think about what that meant for the rest of them, walking around with their own hollowness, their own secret hungers. But Michelle Torres thought about it. She thought about it every time she felt empty, every time the loneliness threatened to swallow her whole. She thought about Connor Burke making his way down the mountain, step by human step, carrying the weight of what he'd done and what he'd been offered and what he'd ultimately refused. She thought about David Ramirez throwing himself off a cliff not because he'd given up, but because he'd finally understood what mattered. The hunger didn't define you. Your choices did, even at the end. Especially at the end. The cold snap broke the next day, temperatures returning to seasonal norms. The frost receded from Grinnell Glacier Trail, the impossible ice vanishing as if it had never been. Hikers returned to the routes, families with children, couples seeking solitude, solo adventurers testing themselves against the mountains. And in the deep places, in the caves and crevasses where cold lived year-round, something old and patient waited for the next hollow soul who would listen. The Wendigo didn't create hunger. It just recognized what was already there and offered a choice. Embrace it or fight it. Become it or die refusing it. Most people never got the offer. Most people lived and died without knowing the depth of the emptiness inside them, the ancient hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the fundamental loneliness of existence. But some people knew. Some people felt it every day. And for those people, the mountains held either salvation or damnation, depending on which choice they made when the cold came calling. Michelle Torres requested a transfer to a different park the following spring. When asked why, she said she wanted a change of scenery. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She'd started feeling the hunger. Not for food, but for meaning, for connection, for something to fill the vast emptiness that modern life seemed designed to create. And she'd heard in the middle of the night when the wind howled down from the glaciers, something calling her name. She left before she had to make Connor's choice, or David's. Some hungers you feed, some you starve, and some you run from as fast as you can, hoping that distance and denial will be enough. The mountains don't care which choice you make. They just remember, and they wait. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.